Greta Hoffman dropped her one trunk in the dust and did not pick it back up. She'd walked the last 4 miles on foot because the stage driver reckoned a woman traveling alone to a dying ranch wouldn't spare her a seat. Now she stood at the gate of Mercer Creek, and the man who'd sent for her looked at her the way you look at a bill you've already been forced to pay. "I asked for a man," Caleb Mercer said. "And I asked for honest work," Greta answered. "One of us will be disappointed. It won't be me." If a woman who refuses to be sent away is the kind of story that keeps you watching, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I love to see just how far this story has traveled. The gate did not open on its own, so Greta opened it. Caleb Mercer stood on the porch with his arms crossed like a fence post that had decided it was a man. A boy watched from behind the doorframe, thin and silent, one hand gripping the wood as if the house might blow away without him holding it down. "You didn't answer me," Caleb said. "I sent to Hay City for a hired man, strong back, somebody who could bring a harvest in before the first frost took it. I paid good money for that telegram." "And you got Greta Hoffman," she said. "You wasted your money if you believe a strong back is the only thing that brings a harvest in." "I believe a man can lift 100-pound sack. Can you? I have lifted heavier than you, Mr. Mercer, and carried it farther." She set her trunk down at the bottom step and did not look tired about it, though she had walked 4 miles in the July heat, because the stage driver reckoned a woman traveling alone to a failing ranch was a woman he didn't need to trouble himself over. "You can pay me for the work I do, not for the shape you expected it to come in." Caleb's jaw worked. He looked past her down the road she'd come up as if another wagon might arrive carrying the man he'd asked for. None came. There was only her and the dust settling around her boots and the heat lying flat and mean over everything he owned. "I don't have wages to waste on a trial," he said. "Then don't waste them. I'll work 3 days. If I'm not worth more than the man you imagined, you send me off and pay me nothing. If I am worth more, you pay me what you'd have paid him. Same dollar. Same handshake." She held out her hand. It was a broad hand, weathered steady. "In my country, we say a bargain is not a bargain until both hands are dirty." He did not take it. The boy did. Ethan Mercer stepped out from behind the doorframe, walked down the porch steps in his stocking feet, and put his small hand into hers before his father could stop him. He shook it once up and down the way he'd seen grown men do at the feed store. "Ethan," Caleb said sharp. "You said whoever came was gonna help." The boy answered, not letting go. "She came." Greta looked down at the boy, and something in her face that had been braced for a fight went quiet. "How old are you?" she asked him. 7. "Then you already have better manners than your father, and he's had 30 years practice." She looked up at Caleb. "Your son shook on it. Are you a man who lets a 7-year-old keep his word while you break yours?" Caleb Mercer came down the steps. He was a tall man gone hard through the shoulders, and he stopped close enough that she could see the grief sitting under his eyes like water under thin ice. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who had run out of ways to be soft and lived. 3 days, he said. "You sleep in the kitchen loft. You take your meals after us, and you don't touch anything that isn't yours to touch. Everything on a dying ranch is mine to touch by the end of the week, Mr. Mercer, or none of it will be anyone's." She picked up her trunk. "Where is the kitchen?" She found it herself before he could answer, and what she found in it stopped her at the door. It was not a kitchen. It was the ruin of one. Flour left open and gone to weevils. A ham hung too long and turned. Beans in a barrel with the lid off, half of them dark with rot at the bottom where the damp had crept up. A boy's plate on the table with a spoon in it and nothing else. She stood there a long moment, and the housekeeping of it told her more about the last 2 years of that family than Caleb Mercer would ever have said out loud. "Who cooked here?" she asked. Caleb had followed her in. "My wife. And since we ate. Since you starved slow and called it eating." She set her trunk on the loft ladder. Who was the boy's mother? Was. The one word closed like a gate. Greta did not open it back up. She took off her traveling coat, hung it on a nail, rolled her sleeves to the elbow, and reached for the barrel of ruined beans. "What are you doing?" Caleb said. "Working. You said 3 days. I don't waste the first one letting you look at me." She hauled the barrel toward the door. "This is spoiled through. If it's near the good grain, it will spoil that too. Where is your seed store?" "You don't need to." "Where is your seed store, Mr. Mercer?" She said it plain without heat, the way a person says a thing they already know the answer will hurt. He didn't answer. "You have no seed store," she said. "You've been eating your seed." The color left his face and came back as anger, which is what shame does in a proud man. "We ate what we had. You ate next spring." Greta set the barrel down. "Do you understand what you have done? You have eaten the ranch, a little every month. And you have been telling yourself you'd make it up when the harvest came, but there is no harvest coming because you planted late and thin, and then you fed the store to the boy." She wasn't shouting. That was the terrible part. She spoke the way a doctor speaks a diagnosis. How long what? How long until the bank calls the note?" Caleb Mercer went very still. "Who told you about a note?" "No one tells me anything. I have eyes. There is a man's boot mark on your porch that isn't yours, and isn't the boy's, and it's a town boot, soft leather made for sitting behind a desk. A man like that only comes out this far for money he's owed, or land he wants." She dusted her hands on her apron. "Which is it?" For the first time, Caleb Mercer looked at her. Really looked at her as if she'd stopped being the wrong shape and started being a person he was going to have to reckon with. "Both," he said. His name was Victor Hale. Caleb told her that night, because she had cooked, had taken the sound beans, and the last of the good flour, and the ham cut back to where it was clean, and made a meal that put color in the boy's cheeks. And a man will say things across a decent table he won't say across an empty one. "He come out in the spring," Caleb said. "Said he was buying up parcels along the creek. Said the railroad was going to want the water rights, and a man who held out would be left with land nobody could reach and nobody would buy. He turned his coffee cup without drinking it. He offered me a price. You didn't take it. I told him this land was my wife's people's before it was mine. I told him he could put his price where the sun didn't warm it." A thin smile gone fast. He tipped his hat and said he admired a man who knew what his home was worth. Then he asked if I knew what the bank thought it was worth. "And you owe the bank. I owe the bank." Caleb's hands closed around the cup. 2 years of drought. Then the fever came through and took... He stopped. He did not say her name. "The doctor cost. The burying cost. A man borrows against next year because next year is all he's got to borrow against. Then next year comes, and it's worse." Greta sat down across from him, uninvited, and the boy watched from the loft ladder where he was meant to be asleep and was not. "How much time?" she said. "Bank sent a man in June. Said I had till first frost to bring the note current, or they'd move on the property." He finally drank. "That's why I sent for a hand. One good harvest, a fair price at market, I'd make the note or close to it. Buy another year. With no seed and half a field. With whatever I had." Greta was quiet a moment. Then, "Show me the papers." "What papers?" "The note, the deed, the letter from the bank, whatever Mr. Hale left in your hands, or whatever he made you sign." "He didn't make me sign anything. Men like Victor Hale always make you sign something. They just make it feel like your idea." She held his gaze. "Show me. 3 days, Mr. Mercer. I'll spend the first one where the trouble actually lives." He went to the bureau, and from a drawer stiff with disuse, he brought out a tin box, and from the box a folded stack of papers gone soft at the creases from being read by a man who did not fully understand them and was too proud to say so. Greta read by lamplight. She read slowly, not because she read poorly, but because she read the way you cross a river you've heard has a drowning in it, one careful stone at a time. Caleb watched her face and learned to hate how little it gave away. When she was done, she folded the papers back along their old creases, which is a thing careful people do, and set them on the table between them. "You didn't sell him your land," she said. I told you I didn't. No, but you signed a lien. Here. She turned a page and laid her finger on a line. This says if you default on the note, the holder of the note has first right to purchase the land at the appraised value. And this, she moved her finger, this says the appraisal is set by a man the note holder chooses. The bank holds the note. The bank held the note. She turned the last page and laid it flat. Do you know what this is? Caleb leaned in. It was a single sheet more official than the rest stamped, and he had put it at the bottom because he had not been able to make himself understand it, and a man will bury what he can't face. It came in June, he said, with the man from the bank. It is a notice of transfer, Mr. Mercer. The bank sold your note, in May, to a private party. She looked up at him. Your note does not belong to the bank anymore. It belongs to Victor Hale. The lamp hissed. Out in the dark, a coyote said something to another coyote and got no answer. That can't be right, Caleb said, but his voice had gone thin. It is very right. It is the rightest thing in this box. Victor Hale did not want to buy your land while you could say no. She tapped the paper. So he bought the thing that lets him say no for you. He bought your debt. When first frost comes, and you cannot pay, and you cannot, we both know you cannot not the way things stand tonight, he doesn't have to make you an offer. He has the first right to buy at an appraisal set by a man he chooses. He will appraise your father-in-law's land at the price of a pair of boots, and he will pay it to himself, and it will all be legal. That is why he tipped his hat. He wasn't admiring your pride, Mr. Mercer. He was measuring the distance he had already put behind him. Caleb Mercer put his face in his hands, not weeping. Men of his making do not weep in front of a woman they've known 9 hours, but close, closer than he'd been in a long time. Then it's done, he said into his palms. He's already won. No. You just told me. I told you what he built. I did not tell you it can't be pulled down. Greta stood, and she gathered the papers, and she did not ask his leave to take them. He made one mistake, and men like him always make it because they think a farmer can't read and a woman can't count. What mistake? He left the papers in your hands. If it were finished, he'd have taken them. He left them because he wanted you to sit here in the dark for 4 months reading them and giving up a little more each night. She held the stack against her chest. I am going to read these until I know them better than the man who wrote them. And then I am going to find the seam. Everything a man builds fast has a seam. Now go to bed, Mr. Mercer. Your son has been listening from the ladder for an hour, and a boy shouldn't hear his father sound like that. Caleb looked up at the loft. Ethan didn't duck away. He met his father's eyes with a 7-year-old's terrible steadiness. Pa, the boy said, is she gonna fix it? And Caleb Mercer, who did not lie to his son because it was the last thing his wife had asked of him, opened his mouth to say he didn't know. Yes, Greta said before he could. Go to sleep, Ethan. Tomorrow you show me the fields and I show you which parts of this ranch are still alive. There are more than your father thinks. She would not begin the field, she said in the morning, until she had seen the county records with her own eyes. You don't believe me now? Caleb asked. I believe you. I do not believe him. A man who forges a boundary once forges it twice. She was already tying her bonnet. Hitch the wagon. We go to town, we see the recorder, we buy what seed a beaten man's credit can still buy, and we come home and work until dark. Bring the boy. I don't leave a child alone on a ranch a stranger has ridden onto twice in one day. The town was 2 hours out, a single street of false-fronted buildings, squinting in the heat, and it went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when the wrong person opens the door. Greta felt the eyes. She had felt eyes like these on 2 continents, and she wore them like a coat she'd grown used to. The recorder was a small man named Pettibone, who kept his ledgers cleaner than his conscience. He looked at Caleb, then at Greta, and addressed only Caleb. Mercer, didn't expect to see you upright. Heard Hale had you about wrapped up. I want to see the record on my note, Caleb said. The transfer, whatever's filed. That's private business between... It's my land. Caleb put both hands flat on the counter. It's filed here because the law says a man can see what's said about his own ground. Now show me Pettibone, or explain to me why a public recorder is hiding a public record. Pettibone's eyes flicked to Greta again. And who's she to be listening? She's the one who reads better than either of us, Caleb said. So she'll be doing the looking. Get the book. Before Pettibone could answer, a voice came from the doorway, a heavy storekeeper named Dell, who'd trailed them in from the mercantile with 2 other men behind him. Mercer, you want my advice? I don't. You'll take Hale's money and go instead of parading a foreign woman through town like she's got a right to our business. What is she? German Dutch. Dell laughed, and the men behind him laughed the way men laugh when one of them gives them leave to. Big country girl, reckon you hired her to plow or to keep you warm through the... Caleb Mercer moved before the sentence finished. He did not raise a fist. He simply stepped between Dell and Greta slow and full, until his shoulder filled the space the insult had been traveling through, and he took his hat off and he held it against his chest, and he looked at the fat storekeeper with eyes gone flat and cold as creek ice. Miss Hoffman, he said, not turning from Dell, is the reason my son ate a hot supper last night for the first time since his mother died. She's forgotten more about keeping a farm alive than every man in this doorway ever learned. And the next one of you finishes a sentence like that where I can hear it is going to finish it on the floor. He set his hat back on. Now, you came for something, Dell. Say it or clear the door. The doorway emptied. Greta had not moved. When the men were gone, she looked at Caleb, and there was something new in her face, careful and warm at once. You didn't need to do that, she said quietly. I know I didn't. He turned back to the counter. Pettibone, the book. The book, when Pettibone brought it, told Greta what she'd come to learn. She ran her finger down the column and stopped and read it twice. There, she said. Look, the transfer of the note to Hale is dated the 4th of May, but the appraisal clause he means to use, the one that lets him set the value, was added by amendment on the 9th. 5 days after he already held the note. She looked up, and her eyes had gone bright the way they went bright over a seam. He changed the terms of the debt after he owned it, Mr. Mercer. That is not a right the law gives a note holder. That is a thing he wrote himself and hoped no one would read. She closed the book gently. Now we have a field to save and a paper to break, and I have seen enough of this town. Buy the seed. We go home. The fields, when they reached them past midday, were worse than she'd let the boy believe, and better than Caleb had let himself. She walked them at a pace that made Ethan trot to keep up, and Caleb following behind with his hat pulled low. Wonder how a woman built the way she was built could cover ground like that without breaking stride. She knelt in the wheat and pulled ahead and rubbed it between her palms and blew the chaff off and looked at the grain in her hand for a long time. Late planted, she said, thin sown, half of it choked before it stood. She crumbled the dry earth. And you have not turned this ground properly in 2 years. I didn't have I know what you didn't have. She stood. I am not blaming you, Mr. Mercer. Blame is a thing you buy when you have money to waste and we don't. I am telling you what is true, so we can begin from the truth instead of from the thing you wish were true. She pointed east. That field is lost. Plow it under, it feeds next year. That one, she pointed north. That one can still make a crop if we thin the weak and water the strong, and God is in a fair mood. And the low field by the creek is your best ground, and you've done nothing with it because it's Hale's land now in your head, before it's his in the ledger. Caleb followed her finger to the low field. That's the field he wants most, for the water. Then that is the field we save first. She said it as though it were obvious, and to her it was. You do not surrender the ground the enemy wants most. You dig in there and make him bleed for it. You talk like a soldier. My grandfather was a soldier. My father was a farmer. I have found the difference is smaller than either would admit. She was already walking toward the low field. Ethan, run to the barn and bring me every sound tool you can carry. And bring your father, because he is going to work today, until his hands remember they belong to a man who owns something." The boy ran. He ran the way children run when they have been given a job that matters after a long time of being given only quiet. Caleb caught her arm, not hard, but it stopped her. "Why?" he said. "Why what?" "Why do you care? You've been here a day. You didn't know us yesterday. You're chasing a fight that isn't yours against a man who ruins people for pleasure over a piece of Kansas dirt that never gave you a thing." His voice was rough. "Why?" Greta looked at his hand on her arm until he took it back. Then she looked at him, and for the first time since she'd walked up that road, she let him see a piece of what was underneath. "Because I know what it is to have a home taken by men in good coats," she said. "Not stolen with a gun, stolen with a paper. My family had land in the old country. Good land. There was a debt and a man who held it, and a court that spoke a language my father read too slowly. I was 14 when we walked off the ground my grandmother was buried in, and the man who took it tipped his hat to my mother on our way out." She let the silence sit. "I have crossed an ocean and half a country, and I have washed other people's floors, and buried a husband of my own in a cold place with a wrong name spelled on the stone. And in all that time, I have wanted exactly one thing, Mr. Mercer: to stand on ground and know that no man in a good coat can tip his hat and take it. I did not find that for myself. But your son shook my hand yesterday, like I was already home." She turned toward the low field. "So I will fight for his. And if you get one too, that is your luck and not my aim." Caleb Mercer stood in his own field and could not for a moment speak. "I don't even know your Christian name," he said finally. "The telegram just said Hoffman." "Greta. Greta." He tried it. It sat strange, and then it sat right. "Caleb. I know your name, Mr. Mercer. It's on every paper Victor Hale means to take from you." She almost smiled. "Now come. Your son is coming back with more tools than his arms can hold, and we are burning daylight we cannot afford to burn." They worked the low field until the sun stood straight up, and then they worked it past that. Greta showed Caleb how his father-in-law's people would have set the water, and it turned out Caleb knew it too in his hands in the old way, and had only forgotten it the way you forget a language when there's no one left to speak it with. The boy carried water and pulled weeds, and did not once say he was tired, because his father was working beside a stranger, and something in the house had changed, and a child feels a change like that in his whole body before he can name it. At noon, a rider came up the creek road. Greta saw the dust first. She always saw the dust first. "Ethan?" she said, easy, not stopping her hands. "Go to the house. Stay by the door. If I call your name, you go inside and you bar it. Do you understand me?" The boy looked at the dust, then at his father. "Do as she says," Caleb said, and the boy went. The rider was a young man in town clothes, soft in the saddle, sweating through a coat he had no business wearing in July. He drew up at the edge of the field and did not dismount. "Mercer," he called. "Caleb Mercer. You found him. I've a letter for you. From Mr. Hale." The young man leaned down and held out an envelope, thick paper sealed. "He asked me to wait while you read it in case you had an answer." Caleb took the envelope. He turned it over. He did not open it. "Read it to me," he said, and held it out not to the writer, but to Greta. It was a small thing. It looked like nothing. But it was the first time in 2 years Caleb Mercer had handed the weight of his own trouble to another person and trusted them to carry a piece of it, and Greta knew exactly how much it had cost him, and she took the envelope, the way you take a thing that has cost someone dearly. She broke the seal. She read it once to herself, her face giving away nothing, and then she read it aloud in a voice as flat and clean as swept boards. "Mr. Mercer, I trust the summer finds your fields as I remember them. I write to offer a kindness. As holder of your note, I am within my rights to wait for the frost and take the land at its appraised value, which will be small. Instead, I offer you this. Sign the enclosed bill of sale now at the price marked, and you may keep your household goods and your horse and leave with your dignity intact. Wait for the frost, and you will leave with neither. A wise man does not gamble against a season. I will send my man again in 1 week for your answer. Respectfully, V. Hale. Via. She lowered the letter. She looked at the price marked on the bill of sale folded behind it, and she did not read that part out loud because Caleb's face had gone gray enough already. The writer waited. "Is there an answer?" he asked. Caleb opened his mouth. "Yes," Greta said. She folded the letter and the bill of sale with it and slid them into her apron pocket where the writer could not see them go. "Tell Mr. Hale that Mercer Creek Ranch received his kindness and returns it. Tell him we are bringing in a harvest. Tell him he is welcome to come and buy his water at market price like any other man, once the wheat is sold and the note is paid. And tell him." She stepped forward, and there was something in the way she stepped that made the young man's horse shift under him. "Tell him the German woman said she has seen his kind of paper before, and it burns the same as any other in a cold winter." The writer looked at Caleb. "That the answer, Mercer—" Caleb Mercer straightened up. He took his hat off, wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist, and put the hat back on, and when he spoke, his voice had found a floor under it that it hadn't had in a long time. "That's the answer," he said, "word for word. And you tell him one thing more from me. Tell him he bought a note. He didn't buy the men on this land. He best learn the difference before the frost." The young man wheeled his horse and rode, and the dust of him hung a while, and then settled, and the field was quiet again, except for the wind moving through the standing wheat. Caleb turned to Greta. She had already gone back to her work bent over the waterline, as if she had not just spoken the boldest words that had been said on that ranch in years. "You didn't read him the price?" Caleb said. "No." "How bad?" Greta straightened. She took the bill of sale from her apron, unfolded it, and held it out so he could read the figure himself, because she had decided the day before that she would never be another person who kept the truth from Caleb Mercer to spare his pride. He read it. His hands closed on the paper. "That's not a price," he said. "That's an insult with a dollar sign. That is what your home is worth to a man who has already decided he owns it." She took the paper back, folded it, and this time she held it up between two fingers where the boy watching from the porch could see. "Ethan," she called. "Come here. Bring the matches from the kitchen." The boy came running. "Greta," Caleb said low. "That's a legal document. It is a copy. He kept the true one. This is the one he sent to frighten you." She struck the match herself when the boy brought it, because she would not put that on a child, and she held the flame to the corner of Victor Hale's bill of sale and let it catch. In my country we have a saying, "A threat you keep is a wound. A threat you burn is only smoke." The paper curled and blackened, and she dropped it and ground it under her boot. Now Mr. Hale's kindness is where it belongs. Ethan, back to the water. Your father and I have a field to save, and a note to beat, and a man to send home with empty hands. The boy laughed, actually laughed, the first Caleb had heard from him since the fever spring, and ran to fetch the pail. And Caleb Mercer stood in the low field by the creek, the field Victor Hale wanted, most watching a German woman he'd tried to send away that same morning, grind the ashes of his ruin into his own good ground. And he understood with a certainty that frightened him more than any banknote ever had, that whatever happened between now and the first frost, he was not going to let her leave in 3 days. He didn't say it. He wasn't a man who said such things easily, and it wasn't the moment. He picked up the spade instead, and he set his boot to it, and he turned the earth beside her until the sun went down. He didn't tell her the 3 days were over. He told her the 4th day's work instead. He came into the kitchen before the sun was full up, and found her already there, already flouring a board, and he stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand like a man who'd come to ask for something, and forgotten the words to it. "There's a fence down on the north line," he said, "and the well rope's frayed to the last strands. Then we mend the rope before a bucket takes the boy's arm off, and the fence after." She didn't look up. "Is that all you came to say?" "No." He turned the hat once in his hands. "I came to say don't count the 3 days. You're not a trial anymore. You're hired. Full wages, same as the man." Greta set the rolling pin down. She looked at him a long moment, and Caleb Mercer, who had faced down a bankman and a land shark and buried his own wife, found he could not hold that look and had to study the floor. "Say the wage out loud," she said, "so there's no misremembering it later. $12 the month and you're bored." 14. A man who reads your ledgers and saves your seed is worth more than a man who lifts a sack. She picked the pin back up. "And I take my meals at the table, not after. I will not eat like a dog in a house I'm keeping alive." Caleb's jaw tightened, and then it let go, and something almost like relief moved behind it. 14. And the table. He set his hat on the peg. "Ethan'll be glad. He asked me last night if you were leaving. Asked it 3 times. And what did you tell him?" "I told him to eat his supper." Caleb went to the door. "But I'd already made up my mind." That was the closest thing to warmth the man had it in him to say before breakfast, and Greta let it be enough because a woman who has crossed an ocean learns the difference between a heart that is cold and a heart that has only forgotten how to open its own door. She spent that first full day in the storeroom, and what she found there took the warmth back out of the morning. She counted everything. She was a woman who counted. She counted the salt pork and the meal and the beans and the seed corn that was left, and she wrote the numbers on the back of one of Hale's own letters in a small hard hand, and then she counted it all again because the first count made no sense to her. Caleb found her there at noon with the tally in her fist. "You've eaten your store," she said. "You told me that. I believed it. But you didn't eat this much, Mr. Mercer. No family of 3 eats this much. Not even a family that gives up and stops caring." "What are you telling me?" "I am telling you, a man who buries his own trouble does not also count his own beans. So somebody counted them for you." She held up the tally. "In 2 years, you have lost near twice what a household this size could burn. The difference did not walk off on its own legs. Somebody carried it." Caleb went still in the way he went still when a thing was too large to look at all at once. "That's a hard thing to say about who? Say the name that just came into your head." He didn't. He wouldn't. But his face said it for him, and Greta watched the name arrive and land, and she waited. "Roy Deakins," he said finally. "Hand of mine. 6 years. He worked this place beside me the whole time Sarah was sick. I paid him last of anybody. Some months I couldn't pay him at all, and he stayed on when—" He stopped. "When men leave, they leave, but he stayed." "When did he go?" "June. Same week the bankman came. Said he'd found work up in Hayes. Shook my hand." Caleb's voice had gone flat and careful. "You're wrong about this one. A man doesn't rob you and shake your hand. A man does exactly that, Mr. Mercer, and calls it a fair morning's business, and I have met 100 of them." She folded the tally. "But I don't accuse a man on arithmetic alone. Arithmetic tells you there was a thief. It doesn't tell you his name. So we watch. We say nothing, and we let the store speak." She was right to wait, and the waiting took 4 days, and in those 4 days the ranch began to come back to life under her hands in a way that had nothing to do with thieves. She set the kitchen right first, because a house is fed from its kitchen, and a family finds its way back to a table before it finds its way back to anything else. She showed Ethan how to render fat clean so it wouldn't turn, and the boy did it with his tongue between his teeth, and looked up at her afterward for a word. "Good," she told him. "You did that better than a grown man. Your mother would say the same, I think." The boy went very quiet. "You didn't know my mother." "No, but I know a kitchen, and this one was kept by a woman who loved it. The way the shelves are set, the nails where things hang, somebody planned this to be a happy room. You don't plan a room to be happy if you aren't." She kept her hands moving so the boy wouldn't feel watched. "Was she happy here?" She sang. Ethan said so soft, it nearly wasn't a word. "Pa doesn't let me talk about it." "Your pa doesn't let himself talk about it. That is a different thing, and it isn't your fault, and it isn't hers." Greta wiped her hands. "You can talk about it to me. I don't break." The boy looked at her, the way a boy looks at the first grown person in a long time who has told him the truth, and something in him that had been holding its breath let a little of it go. Caleb in the doorway heard the last of it and said nothing, and turned around and went back out to the barn, where a man could stand a moment without anyone watching his face. The town closed its hand on them on the 5th day. Greta drove the wagons in for nails and coffee and the little that $14 a month and a beaten man's credit could still buy. And Dell the storekeeper met her at the counter with his arms folded over his apron and a look on him she'd seen worn by better men than him. "Cash," Dell said. "No more book for Mercer. Owner's orders." "You are the owner. I got a note come due to a man in town same as anybody." Dell wouldn't meet her eyes. "And that man says the Mercer account's closed, so it's closed. Victor Hale holds your note." "I didn't say a name. You didn't have to. He is buying the whole town's debt the way he bought ours, one man at a time, so that when he tells you to close a book, you close it and tell yourself it's your own idea." Greta set her coins on the counter, hard the exact count of what she'd come to buy. "Cash, then." "I have cash. Fill it." Dell looked at the coins, and looked at the door, and looked at nothing. "Can't. He said no goods to Mercer at any price." For a moment Greta said nothing at all, and the silence in the store was the kind that makes men shift their feet. "Then understand what you've told me," she said quietly. "You've told me a man who lives 2 hours off owns your hands. You've told every farmer in this valley that when Victor Hale wants their land, he'll starve them off it through you, and you'll let him because you're afraid of a paper. When it's your turn, and it will be your turn. Mr. Dell, men like him always run out of other people. You remember that you drew this line yourself at this counter over a sack of nails." She swept the coins back into her palm. "Keep your nails. I've bought worse men's silence with less." She walked out with her back straight and her face still, and she made it all the way to the wagon before her hands started to shake, and she let them shake there, where no one could see, and then she stopped them, because Ethan was climbing up beside her, and a child should not learn fear from the person who is supposed to stand between him and it. "They wouldn't sell to us," the boy said. He'd heard. He heard everything. "No. Because of the mean man. Because of the mean man." Greta took up the reins. "But listen to me, Ethan. A mean man who owns a store owns a store. He does not own the ground under your feet, and he does not own your father's back, and he does not own me. There are more of us than there are of him. He only wins if we each stand alone and afraid at a counter. We are not going to do that." She told Caleb that night at the table with the boy sent up to the loft and pretending to sleep. Caleb took it worse than the store, worse than the note, worse than anything since the letter. "Then we can't buy," he said. "Can't buy seed, can't buy nails, can't buy a lamp wick. He's cut the town off from us like a man cuts a limb off a tree." His hands were flat on the table and pressing down as if he could hold the whole ranch still by main force. "How do we bring in a harvest with no wire, no oil? No. We bring it in with what we have and what we can make and what we can trade for outside his reach." Greta was already writing on the back of another of Hale's letters. "There are other towns. There is a rail depot at Ellsworth that answers to no man in this valley. And there are farmers between here and there who hate Victor Hale as much as you do and are only waiting for one man to stop being afraid at a counter. You don't know these people. You've been here 2 weeks. I have been poor and foreign in 3 countries, Mr. Mercer. I know exactly these people. There is always a Hale, and there is always a Dell, and there is always—" she looked up, "there is always a Deacons, and I think tomorrow the store is going to tell us his name for certain." It did, though not the way she'd meant it. She'd set a trap in the storeroom, a plain one, an honest one. She'd stacked the last of the good seed corn with the sacks turned a particular way, and she'd marked the 3rd sack from the wall with a smear of lampblack on its underside, where no honest eye would look. And she'd counted them out loud in the yard, where the wind carries a voice further than a careful person thinks. Then she'd waited 2 nights. On the 2nd night, the dog didn't bark. That was the thing that woke her. Not a noise, but the wrong kind of quiet, the quiet of a dog that knows the man coming through the yard. She came down the loft ladder in her stocking feet with her shawl over her nightdress, and she took the poker from the stove, and she went out the kitchen door into the dark, and she found a man in the storeroom with a sack over his shoulder, and the moon just enough to show her the shape of him. "Put it down," she said. The man froze. Then slow. He set the sack down, and he turned, and he was younger than she'd thought, and older than his face, and even in the dark, she could see he wasn't surprised to be caught so much as tired of it. "You'd be the German," he said. "And you'd be Roy Deakins. 6 years a hand here. The man who stayed when others left." He flinched at that. "How'd you—" "Because a stranger doesn't know which sack has the good seat in the dark, and you went straight to the third from the wall." She stepped into the doorway so he couldn't pass her without going through her, and at her size that was not a small thing to consider. "You've robbed this family for 2 years, while the wife was dying, while the boy went thin. You carried this store off a sack at a time and shook Caleb Mercer's hand on your way out the gate." "It ain't like that." "Then tell me what it's like, Roy Deakins. I have all night, and you have a sack of stolen seed at your feet. So tell me true, because if you lie, I'll wake the house and the boy will see the man his father trusted for what he is, and I don't think even you want the boy to see that." Deakins stood a long moment, and then the fight went out of him all at once the way it does in a man who's been carrying a thing too long. "Hale," he said. "It was Hale. 2 years back when Miss Sarah first took sick, he come to me private. Said Caleb was finished, just didn't know it yet. Said the ranch was gonna fall and I could fall with it, or I could earn a little on the side helping it fall soft." Deacon's voice cracked. "I had a sick wife of my own up in Hayes. I told myself I was just taking what was gonna be lost anyhow." "You told yourself a coward's arithmetic." "I know what I told myself." He wouldn't look at her. "He paid me to skim the store. Then this June he paid me more to quit and swear to a paper. Said Caleb had let hands go unpaid run the place into ruin, wasn't fit to hold it. My mark's on that paper, ma'am, in the bank in town, saying Caleb Mercer ran his own ranch into the dirt." He put his face in his hand. "I sold the only decent man I ever worked for skim and a signature." And that was the twist of it that Greta hadn't seen coming. The thing that turned a thief into a weapon, because she'd been looking for a man who'd stolen grain, and she'd found instead a man whose signature was the whole foundation Victor Hale meant to build his theft on. "Roy Deakins," she said slowly, "you are going to make this right. Can't. It's signed. It's filed. A man can't unsay a bet. A man can swear a new thing that unsays the old, if he'll swear it before someone the law believes." She stepped closer. "That paper says Caleb Mercer ruined his own land. But you and I know it was you emptying his store, and Hale holding the knife. If you swear the truth, that you were paid to steal and paid to lie, then Hale's paper isn't a paper anymore. It's a confession. His, not Caleb's. He'll ruin me. He's already ruined you. He made you a thief and a liar, and he'll drop you the day you stop being useful, and you know it, or you wouldn't be out here in the dark, taking seed, instead of sitting warm on Hale's money." She held out her hand, the same broad, steady hand she'd held out to Caleb in the dust that first day. "You stayed when the others left. There was something in you worth staying Roy Deakins before he bought it. I'm asking you to be that man one more time." Deakins looked at her hand for a long, long moment. Then a voice came from the yard behind her, low and terrible and quiet. "Roy." Caleb stood in the moonlight in his nightshirt with a rifle held down along his leg, and he'd heard Greta knew the moment she saw his face that he'd heard all of it from the sack to the signature. And there was a thing in that face that was worse than any anger, because it was grief, the grief of a man learning that a friendship he'd counted real had been a hand in his pocket the whole time. "Caleb," Deakins started. "Don't." Caleb's voice didn't rise. That was the frightening part. 6 years. I gave you Sarah's brother's saddle when he passed. You sat at my table Christmas when your own wife was too sick to travel. My boy called you uncle." The rifle didn't come up, but his hand was white on it. "And you skimmed my store while she was dying. You watched Ethan go thin. Give me one reason, Roy. One." "I don't have one," Deacon said, and to his small credit he said it plain. "There ain't one. I did it. I'm a low man, and I did a low thing, and I'd give my arm to take it back." "Then don't give your arm. Greta said, stepping between the two men without seeming to hurry, the way she did everything, so that neither of them quite noticed she'd put herself where the rifle would have to pass through her to reach anyone. Give your word. Sworn. Written. Before the county judge, not that recorder in Hale's pocket. Give the truth, Roy. And it's worth more to this family than your arm and your grief, and your low man's sorrow altogether. She turned to Caleb. You can shoot him and lose the only witness who can break Hale's paper. Or you can let me keep him alive and turned and use him. Which serves the boy, Mr. Mercer, which serves Ethan. Because that is the only question in this yard tonight. The rifle stayed down. Caleb Mercer stood in the moonlight and fought the hardest fight of that whole hard summer, which was not against Hale, and was not against the bank, but was against the thing in his own chest that wanted very badly to make Roy Deakins pay for 2 years of grief in the next 2 seconds. And Greta watched him win it, watched him set it down piece by piece, and she thought, there. That is the man Sarah married. He is still in there. You'll sleep in the barn tonight, Caleb said at last. Under my eye. And in the morning we ride to the county seat and you swear it before a judge every word, and if you run, I will find you, Roy, and there won't be a German woman between us that day. He lowered the rifle the rest of the way. And then, God help me, then I reckon you're going to help us bring this harvest in, because you owe this family a crop, and you're going to pay it in your own sweat before you ride off my land forever. Deakins wept then openly, the way a man weeps who has been carrying a stone too long, and is finally allowed to set it down, even though setting it down costs him everything. I'll swear it, he said. Every word. And I'll work till my hands bleed. I swear that too. Don't swear to me, Caleb said, turning back toward the house. Swear to the boy in the morning. He's the one you starved. They rode to the county seat 2 days later, and Roy Deakins swore his confession before a judge who was not in Victor Hale's pocket, and it was written down and stamped and witnessed, and Greta made 2 copies in her own hard hand, and kept one in the tin box, and gave one to the judge to hold, because she was a woman who had learned that a single copy of anything is a copy a determined man can make disappear. Now we have his seam, she told Caleb on the ride home, the confession folded against her heart. He built his theft on Deakins's lie. We've turned the lie inside out. When Hale moves on the land at Frost, we don't beg. We put this in front of the court, and we ask a simple thing. How can a man take a ranch on the sworn word of a thief he paid to lie? The whole floor drops out from under him. If the court's honest, then we make it honest by making it public. A judge in a pocket is quiet. A judge with a town watching is a different judge. She looked out at the road. But that is the Frost. That is still weeks off. Between now and then he still owns the note and we still owe it, and a confession does not put wheat in a wagon. Which was the wall they hit next, and it was a higher wall than the store. They had a crop coming. The low field had turned. The north field had thinned to something that would stand, and with Deakins working like a man trying to sweat 2 years' sin out through his skin, there was going to be wheat. Not a fortune. But enough sold fair to bring the note current and buy the year Caleb had prayed for. So Greta rode to the grain buyer at the depot to arrange the sale ahead the way a careful farmer does. The buyer was a broad, decent-looking man named Hollis, who ran the elevator at the rail siding, and he heard her out, and he shook his head before she'd finished. Can't take Mercer wheat, he said. Wish I could. Mercer's good grain always was. But I got a contract says I buy through Consolidated Grain this season exclusive, and Consolidated says which farms I take and which I don't. He wouldn't meet her eyes either, and she was learning that face, the face of a decent man doing an indecent thing because a paper told him to. Mercer's not on the list. Who owns Consolidated Grain? Can't rightly say. You can. You just won't. It's Victor Hale. Greta felt the whole shape of it settle over her, then cold and clean and complete the way you finally see the whole of a thing you've only been touching pieces of in the dark. He doesn't only own the store and the recorder and Deakins. He owns the buyer. He's built a wall around the only door your grain can walk out of. We can save every stalk in that field, and it dies in the wagon, because there is no honest man left between here and the rail who's allowed to buy it. That's about the size of it, ma'am. Hollis had the grace to look sick about it. He's been buying up the buyers for 2 years. Anybody wants to sell grain in this county sells through him now at his price. Most folks don't even know it's him. They just know the price got low and the choices got few. And when a farmer can't sell his grain at a fair price, he can't pay his note, and then... Hollis stopped. And then a man named Victor Hale, who happens to hold the note, buys the land for the price of a pair of boots. Greta stood. You've built his machine for him, Mr. Hollis. Every man in this valley who signed his little paper and closed his little book and looked at his own boots, you built it. And you'll be ground up in it same as the rest when your turn comes. She should have left angry. Instead, she stopped at the door and turned back because a woman who has been poor knows that anger buys nothing, and a decent man ashamed is worth more turned than shamed. How much does Consolidated pay you the bushel? She asked. 31 cents, down from 52 years back. And if a farmer had a buyer who'd pay 40 cash and haul his own grain to a siding 2 counties east where Consolidated's contract doesn't reach, would you tell him that door was there? Or would you tell your friends? She let it sit. You're not the only elevator man in Kansas, Mr. Hollis. You're only the nearest one Hale's bought. I'm going to find the ones he hasn't. And when I do, I'm going to bring not just Mercer's wheat, but every small farmer's wheat in this valley through that door all at once, so many wagons that Consolidated's low price looks like the theft it is. And on that day, the men who stood at counters looking at their boots are going to remember there was another road and it ran right past your elevator and you didn't tell a soul. She opened the door. Unless you'd like to be the man who did. Hollis said nothing. But he didn't say no, and Greta had learned that from a decent man, a shamed no and nothing are very different words. She carried it home to Caleb, and for the first time, she carried more hope than trouble, and Caleb heard the plan of it. The eastern siding, the fair buyer, the valley farmers bound together in one great line of wagons. Hale couldn't turn away one at a time. And he looked at her across the table, with the boy asleep at last, and Deacons bedded down honest in the barn, and he said the thing he had been not saying for 2 weeks. Sarah would have liked you, he said. She was the only other person I ever knew who looked at a wall and saw a door somebody forgot to open. Greta went still. That's the first time you've said her name, she said, since I came. I know. Caleb turned his cup. It don't hurt the way I thought it would. Saying it. He looked up. Might be I've had it wrong. Might be the not saying was the thing that hurt. It usually is. Greta reached across the table, not to his hand. She wasn't a foolish woman, and it wasn't that kind of moment, but to the confession folded there, and she squared it neat against the wood. We have a witness, a plan, and a door 2 counties east. It is the most this ranch has had in 2 years. Sleep on it, Mr. Mercer. Tomorrow we start telling the valley farmers one at a time that there's another road. And she went up the ladder to the loft, and Caleb sat a while longer, with his wife's name sitting easy in the room for the first time in 2 years. And out in the barn, a reformed thief slept the hard, clean sleep of a man who'd set his stone down. And the ranch that had been 30 days from dying held its breath and began very quietly to want to live. But Victor Hale had not built 2 years of walls to watch a German cook find a door in them, and he had ears in that valley Greta hadn't found yet. And by the end of that same week, he knew about the eastern siding and the confession and the wagons she meant to line up against him. And a man who owns the store and the recorder and the buyer and the bank has one thing left to reach for when paper stops working, and that is fire. It came on the driest night of the summer. The dog didn't bark that night either, and Greta had learned what a quiet dog meant, and she was already half down the ladder when the light bloomed orange against the loft's one small window, and Ethan sat straight up in his blankets and screamed a word no 7-year-old should have to scream. Fire pa the barn's afire. Greta hit the yard running with Caleb astride behind her and Deacons already out of the burning barn dragging a horse by the halter with his shirt tied over its eyes, and the flames were in the hay and climbing the wall toward the loft where the winter feed was stored. The well! Greta shouted. Caleb, the buckets. Ethan, you stay by the house. You do not come past the pump. Do you hear me? Not one step. There's 2 more horses in there, Deacons yelled over the roar. He'd already turned back toward the door, coughing his face black. "The bay and the boy's pony." "Roy, don't," Caleb started. "I owe this family a barn." Deacons was gone into the smoke before the sentence finished, and for a terrible stretch, there was nothing but the fire, and Caleb hauling water, and Greta swinging buckets up the line so fast her arms went numb. And then Deacons came out backward, through the smoke, leading both animals. The pony's mane singed his own shirt, smoking at the shoulder, and he went down on his knees in the yard and could not get up, and the boy's pony was alive. "Beat it out, his shoulder, beat it out." Greta was on Deacons with a wet blanket before Caleb reached them, smothering the fire in the man's shirt with her bare hands and the sodden wool. And Deacons looked up at her through streaming eyes. "Saved the pony?" he wheezed. "Tell the boy. Tell him Roy saved his pony. Tell him yourself, you fool, you're not dead." She hauled him upright by the collar with a strength that surprised even Caleb. "Back on the line. The barn's lost, but the flames'll take the granary next, and the granary is our whole harvest. Move, all of you, move the wheat, save the wheat." They fought the fire away from the granary because Greta made them. Because she stood at the head of that bucket line, soaked through and roaring like a woman who had already lost one home to men in good coats, and would sooner burn with this one than lose it the same way twice. And they held it. The barn fell in on itself and died, but the granary stood and the wheat inside it stood, and when the worst of it was beaten down to smoke and ember, Greta finally straightened and turned to catch her breath. And there in the fence line, mounted unhurried, watching the light he'd made, sat a man she had never seen, but knew on sight, the way you know a thing you've heard described 100 times. He touched the brim of his hat to her across the firelight, polite as a Sunday, and turned his horse to go. Victor Hale had finally come to Mercer Creek in person, and he'd come to burn it, and he tipped his hat on his way out. Exactly the way the man in the good coat had tipped his hat to her mother, 30 years and one ocean ago. And something in Greta Hoffman that had been folded up small and carried a very long way came all the way open at last. She did not run after him. That was the first thing that told Caleb the fire had changed her, because the woman who'd stood at the head of the bucket line roaring loud enough to shake the flames back now stood dead still and watched Victor Hale ride off at a walk, memorizing the set of his shoulders, the way you memorize a face you mean to see again in a courtroom. "You let him go," Caleb said. His voice was raw with smoke and something worse. "I let a man on a fast horse go from a woman on foot at 3 a.m, yes." She turned. "Where would you have had me run to Mr. Mercer into his gun? He would like nothing better than a Mercer shot dead in a yard the night his own barn burned. Then he'd tell the sheriff we set the fire ourselves and lost our heads, and he'd take the land off a grave." She was already moving toward Deacons, who lay where she'd hauled him, gray and shaking. "Get water. Not the well, the trough. His shoulder needs cool, not clean, and it needs it now." They worked over Deacons till the sky went from black to the ugly gray that comes before a summer dawn, and the man lived, which surprised him more than anyone. And when he could speak, he said the same thing 3 times through his cracked lips. "I saw him strike the match. I'll swear it. I saw Hale strike the match with my own eyes, Caleb, and I'll swear that too, right alongside the rest." "You'll swear nothing till you can stand," Greta said. But she'd heard it, and she'd filed it where she filed everything. And she thought, now we have 2 things sworn against him: the skim and the fire. And a man can only tip his hat over so many graves before the town stops tipping back. The sheriff came at noon. His name was Amos Ward, a heavy, slow-moving man who'd worn the Star 11 years, and had learned in that time exactly how much trouble was worth taking on, and exactly how much wasn't. And Greta read him the moment he came down off his horse and didn't take his hat off to her. "Heard you had a fire," Ward said to Caleb. "You heard right. Barn's gone." "Lightning. Wasn't a cloud in the sky. You know that as well as me." Ward hooked his thumbs in his belt and looked at the black ruin and looked at nothing. Then a lamp got knocked over, or a hand got careless with a smoke. Happens on a dry ranch. Victor Hale sat that fence line and watched it burn, Caleb said. My hand there saw him strike the match. That hand. Ward's eyes moved to Deacons propped against the trough. "Roy Deacons." Same Roy Deakins swore in the bank not a month back that you ran this place into ruin yourself. Now he swears the opposite, and he swears he saw a rich man light a fire in the dark from 100 feet off. Ward shook his head slow. That's a witness'll get laughed out of any court in the state, Mercer, and you know it. A thief who says whatever the last person to feed him wants him to say. And there was the first wall of that new stretch, and it was worse than the store and worse than the buyer, because it was the law itself telling Greta that the truth was worthless in a mouth nobody trusted. You won't even ride out and ask Mr. Hale where he was last night, Greta said. Ward looked at her, then finally the way a man looks at a thing that's spoken out of turn. Ma'am, I don't believe I've had the pleasure. You haven't. I'm the German cook. You may write that down if it helps you decide whose word counts on your side of the county. She stepped forward. I am not asking you to arrest a man on a thief's word. I am asking you to ride 4 miles and ask a rich man one question, and watch his face while he answers it. If he's innocent, he loses nothing but 10 minutes. If he's guilty, you'll see it. You've worn that star 11 years, Sheriff. You know a lie when it's standing in front of you in a good coat. The only question is whether you've decided in advance not to look. Ward's jaw worked. He was not. Greta saw a wholly bought man, only a tired one, which in the end came to the same thing until somebody made staying tired cost more than the alternative. I'll note the fire in my book, he said at last. That's what I can do. Then note this in it too, Greta said. Note that the German cook told you in front of witnesses on the morning of the 2nd of August that Victor Hale means to burn every farm in this valley off its land one at a time, and that when he does, the book will show you were told, and you noted a lamp got knocked over. She held his eyes. Some men would rather be remembered as slow than as owned. I'm giving you the chance to be the first kind. Take it or don't. She turned and walked back to the house before he could answer, because she'd learned that a man decides more when he's left alone with a thing than when he's argued at, and Amos Ward rode off with her words riding heavier in his book than he'd have liked. Hale's true answer came 2 days later, and it did not come from the sheriff. It came in an envelope hand-delivered by the same soft young rider, and this time Caleb opened it himself before Greta could reach for it, and read it and set it down on the table with a hand that had gone unsteady. He's calling the note, Caleb said. All of it, now. He can't. The note runs to First Frost. It's written. I've read it 100 times. There's a clause. Caleb pushed the letter to her. Read it. Says if the securities... He had to find the word. If the securities materially diminished, the holder can call the full balance at once, and the barn burning down diminished the security. He laughed, and there was no humor in it, only a man watching the trap close. He burned my barn to lower the worth of my land so he could call the note early on the grounds that my land wasn't worth enough. He set the fire that gives him the right. Greta read it twice, and her face gave nothing, and inside her something went very cold and very clear. How long does the letter give you? 10 days. Pay the full balance in 10 days, or he moves to seize. Caleb put both hands flat on the table and pressed. Greta, the harvest isn't in for near a month yet. There's no way on God's earth I raise that money in 10 days. He's moved the frost up to the 2nd week of August, and there's not a thing. There is a thing. She folded the letter. There is always a thing. A clause that lets a man profit from his own arson is a clause a court can be made to gag on if we put the fire and the skim and the confession all in front of it at once, in the open with the town watching. 10 days is enough time to be heard. It is not enough time to be beaten. She stood. But you have to hold Mr. Mercer. You have to hold 10 days without breaking, and I am watching you already start to break, and I need to know why. Caleb didn't answer at first. He looked toward the loft where Ethan sat with his knees drawn up, listening the way he always listened, and something moved across the man's face that Greta had not seen there before, and it frightened her more than the letter. He burned my barn with my son asleep 40 feet from it, Caleb said quietly. Next time it might be the house. Next time the boy doesn't wake up. His voice cracked down the middle. I keep thinking Sarah's people's land isn't worth Sarah's son. That maybe the thing a father does is take the man's money low as it is and get his boy somewhere a rich man's got no reason to strike a match. Maybe holding on is just my pride. And my pride already got my barn burned. And next it's... He stopped. He couldn't say it. And there it was, the deepest cut Hale had made, yet deeper than any claws he had reached past Caleb's land, and put his hand on Caleb's fear for his child, and a proud man will lose a house before he'll gamble a son. And Hale knew it. Greta sat down across from him, and for the first time since she'd come, she did not answer fast. "Listen to me," she said, and her voice had gone low and careful, in a way the boy in the loft strained to hear. "I am not going to tell you your fear is foolish because it is not foolish, it is the truest thing in this room. A man should fear for his boy. But I will tell you what I know, that you do not, because I have stood where you are standing." She folded her hands. "When I was 14, and the men in good coats came for my family's land, my father did exactly what you are thinking of doing. He said better to leave with our lives than fight and risk the children. He took what they offered, which was little, and we left. And do you know what it bought us, Mr. Mercer? It bought us nothing. Because a man like Hale does not want you gone. He wants you broken. And a man who breaks once to save his child teaches his child that the world belongs to whoever is willing to burn a barn. My father saved my body that day, and he handed my whole life over to the men in the coats, and I have spent 30 years and one ocean trying to buy back the thing he gave away for the price of a quiet night's sleep." Ethan had come to the top of the ladder. Neither of them told him to go back. "You want to send Ethan somewhere safe?" Greta went on. "So do I. But there is no somewhere safe for a boy who watched his father fold. That boy carries the fold his whole life. The safe place for your son Caleb Mercer is standing beside a father who did not run. That is the only inheritance a man like Hale can never burn." She stood. "You asked me on the first day why I care. I told you it was the boy. It is still the boy. So no, you do not take the money. You hold. And I will make Victor Hale's 10 days into the 10 days he loses everything." Caleb sat a long while with his face in his hands. "Pa," Ethan said from the ladder, "I don't want to go somewhere. I want to stay with you and Miss Greta and fight the mean man." Caleb looked up at his son. Then he looked at Greta. Then he stood, and he took his hat off the peg, and Greta's whole body went tight because she thought for one terrible moment he was riding to Hale to take the deal after all. "Where are you going?" she said. "To town." He set the hat on his head. "To tell Amos Ward that if he won't ride out and ask Hale one question, I'll ask it myself in front of the whole street and let the town watch his face same as you said. You're right about one thing, Greta. Hale wins in the quiet. So we're done being quiet." He paused at the door. "Come with me, both of you. If we're going to stop hiding, we hide nothing." And that was the turn in Caleb Mercer that Greta had been working toward for 3 weeks without ever letting him see the work. Not a man rescued, but a man who'd decided to stand back up on his own legs, and she took up her bonnet and did not let him see how much it meant to her that he'd asked them to come. They found Victor Hale in town, which was luck, or which was Hale letting himself be found because a man that careful is rarely anywhere by accident. He was standing on the porch of the bank, in a coat too fine for the heat, and he watched the Mercer wagon come up the street with an expression of mild, patient interest, the look of a man watching a horse he already owns decide whether or not to buck. Caleb pulled up in front of him and did not get down. "Hale, Mr. Mercer?" Hale touched his hat. "I hoped you'd come see reason after my letter. 10 days is a kindness, you understand. I could have called it the morning after the unfortunate fire." "You set that fire." Hale's smile didn't move. "That's a serious thing to say on a public street with the sheriff's office not 30 feet off. I'd be careful, Mr. Mercer, saying a thing like that, where a man might have to answer it in court." He came down one step. "But since you've come all this way, let me save us both the trouble. I'll raise my offer, not much, but enough that a sensible man takes it, packs his boy and his goods, and starts fresh somewhere the summers are kinder. What do you say?" And here, Greta stepped down off the wagon, and the whole street felt her do it. The big German woman coming down into the dust to stand beside the wagon wheel, and Hale turned that mild, interested look on her for the first time. "You'd be the cook," he said. "I'd be the one who reads the papers you hoped no one could read." She looked up at him, unhurried. "I have a question for you, Mr. Hale, and I'd like the street to hear the answer, because I think the answer is worth more to these good people than anything you've told them in 2 years. You've bought up half this valley, telling every farmer the railroad's coming, and the water rights along Mercer Creek will be worth a fortune, and a man who doesn't sell now will be left holding land the railroad routes around." "Yes, that's public knowledge," Hale said easily. "I've done these farmers a favor buying when others wouldn't. Then show me the survey." Greta took one step closer. "The railroad survey, the one that says the line runs through this valley. Every railroad files a survey before it lays a foot of track. Mr. Hale, the whole world can look at it. It's a public thing. You've been telling this valley the railroad is coming for 2 years, so show us the survey. Show one man on this street the paper that says a single mile of track will ever touch Mercer Creek." The street went very quiet. Hale's smile stayed where it was, but something behind it flickered. Not fear. Greta saw Hale was past fear, but the cold recalculation of a man who's just felt a floor he thought was solid give a half-inch under his boot. "Surveys are confidential until—" "There is no survey." Greta didn't raise her voice, which made it land harder. "There is no railroad. There never was. You invented a railroad, Mr. Hale, the way a card sharp invents a run of luck to panic honest farmers into selling good land for the price of a scare. Every man on this street who sold you a parcel in the last 2 years sold it into a lie." She turned slowly and spoke not to Hale now, but to the men who'd drifted out of the store and the barbers and the feedlot to watch. "There is no railroad coming to save your land or to route around it. He made it up. And you believed it because a man in a fine coat said it on this same porch, and it was easier to believe than to check. You've a wild imagination for a servant," Hale said, and for the first time his voice had an edge in it. "I have a very ordinary imagination and a great deal of time to read." She stepped closer, still close enough now that the street had to lean to hear, which was exactly where she wanted them. "You want to know how I found it, Mr. Hale? You told me yourself without meaning to. In your letters. You wrote 3 of them to a farmer you'd already ruined, and everyone talked about the note, the appraisal, the price, and not one, not a single line in 3 letters, mentioned the railroad. You told the whole valley was coming. A man selling a lie writes it in every letter. A man who knows the lie's already done its work stops bothering to tell it. You forgot to keep lying to a man you thought was finished. That's how I knew." She let it sit. "But here is the part I did not learn from your letters, and here is why you want Mercer Creek most of all, more than any parcel in this valley. You don't care about a railroad that isn't coming. You care about the water. Mercer Creek rises on this man's low field. That field is the head of the creek. Every farm downstream of it, every farm on this street's account books, every man standing here draws its water off that creek." "Valshinera." She let it land. "Whoever holds the head of Mercer Creek holds the water of this whole valley. And in a dry year, Mr. Hale means to dam it. He means to make every one of you pay him for the water God sends down that creek, or watch your crops burn while his stays green. He isn't buying land, gentlemen. He's buying your thirst. And Caleb Mercer's low field is the tap he means to close his hand around." The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened in that town in a decade. And Victor Hale, who had run a 2-year bluff without a crack in it, made the one mistake a cold man makes. When a warm crowd turns, he stopped smiling. "This is nonsense," he said too fast. "Sentimental foreign nonsense. Not one of you is fool enough to—" "You called it my land, Hale." Caleb spoke from the wagon for the first time, and every head turned. "Back in the spring on this same porch, you offered to buy my low field alone. Not the house, not the North Acres, the low field. I thought you were simple. Now I know you were counting the water and hoping I couldn't." He looked out at the crowd. "He offered me 3 times the acre for that one field that he offered for the rest. Ask yourselves why a man pays triple for the worst drained ground on a ranch. He wasn't buying dirt. She's telling you the truth. Show us the survey, Hale. It was a farmer's voice from the crowd, weathered and hard. A man named Vance who'd sold Hale 40 acres the spring before. You showed me a map 2 years back. Said the line was coming. I sold on that map. Now the German woman says there's no survey behind it. So show it, right now. Or I'm gonna start thinking I sold my daddy's North 40 for a picture you drew yourself. Vance, show us the survey. Another voice, then another, and the porch of the bank, which had been Victor Hale's pulpit for 2 years, became a thing he was standing on alone above a crowd that had just all at once remembered how to count. Hale did not show them a survey because there was none, and a man cannot produce a thing that does not exist, no matter how fine his coat, and the not showing was the whole answer, and the street read it. I'll not be interrogated by a mob, Hale said, and he went inside the bank and the door closed behind him, and for one shining moment, Greta Hoffman had turned a whole town against the man who owned its debt, with nothing but a question about a piece of paper that wasn't there. But she knew better than to think it was one, and she was right, because a cornered man with money is more dangerous than a comfortable one. And Victor Hale had 2 years and a great deal of money, and a witness he now needed, dead more than he needed the town quiet. Vance had come off the crowd and gripped Caleb's hand hard, and other men clapped his shoulder. And for a moment the street had the loose, glad noise of men who've just remembered they outnumber the thing they feared. But Greta did not smile with them, and Caleb saw it and leaned down from the wagon. You won, he said. Why do you look like you lost? Because I've seen a rich man's face go from smiling to still, and I have never once seen it go still and then let a thing lie. She took up the reins. We shamed him in front of the people he needs, afraid of him. That is not a wound a man like Hale forgives. It's a wound he answers. She clucked the team into motion. Sleep with the rifle close tonight, Mr. Mercer. We stopped playing for the town today. Tomorrow, he starts playing for keeps. They came for Deacons that night. Greta had known they might. She'd told Caleb as they drove home, flush with the day's victory. He can't answer the water with the town watching, so he'll answer the witness in the dark, because a confession is only worth a living man to swear it. And so Deacons had not slept in the open barn's ashes, but in the root cellar under the kitchen, with the door barred, and Caleb had sat up in the dark of the porch with the rifle across his knees. And when the 2 riders came through the yard just past midnight, moving quiet with cloth tied over their horses' feet, he was ready for them. That's far enough, Caleb said out of the dark, and the click of the rifle's hammer was louder than any shout. The 2 men reined up hard. One went for his own gun, and Caleb put a bullet in the dirt between the horse's legs, and both animals screamed and reared, and the second man was already turning to run. Roy Deacons is under my floor and under my gun, Caleb called after them, and there's a sworn copy of every word he said in a judge's safe in the county seat that no man of Hale's can reach. You tell your paymaster that. You tell him killing the witness doesn't burn the paper anymore. You tell him he's too late. They were gone into the dark. But Greta, standing in the kitchen doorway with Ethan pushed behind her skirts, and the poker in her fist had caught the face of the nearer man in the muzzle flash, and she stood very still after, and Caleb came in shaking with the spent fright of it, and found her staring at nothing. You know him, Caleb said. The one in front. You saw him. I saw him. Greta's voice had gone strange. It was the young rider, the soft one who brings the letters. She set the poker down slowly. Hale sends the same boy to hand you an envelope in daylight, and to cut a witness's throat in the dark. He's careful with everyone, but the one who does his lowest work, because he thinks that one's already too dirty to matter. She looked up. That's a man who'll be turned Caleb if we ever get him alone. A man used like that hates the hand that uses him. Remember his face. Remember his face, Caleb repeated. You're gathering an army out of Hale's own leavings. A turned thief. A turned messenger. Half a town. That is the only kind of army a poor family ever has, Greta said. The people the rich man used up and threw down. We don't beat Victor Hale with money, Mr. Mercer, because he has all of it. We beat him with everyone he ever stepped on to get it standing up at the same time. And after today, that is most of this valley. The next 4 days were the fastest of that whole summer, and Greta drove them like a woman running ahead of a fire, which she was. She and Caleb rode the valley farm to farm, no longer hiding, no longer alone. And at every door, Greta laid down the same 3 things. There is no railroad. Hale means to dam the creek and sell you your own water, and there is a fair buyer 2 counties east and a line of wagons forming that Hale's contract cannot turn away. Some doors opened. Vance's opened first and widest, and Vance brought 3 more with him. Hard men who'd sold in the panic and wanted their pride back if they couldn't have their acres. The Hollister place opened. The widow Pruitt met them at her gate with a shotgun broken open over her arm, and her chin up a lean gray woman of 60 who ran 200 acres with 2 hired boys and buried a husband to the same fever that took Sarah Mercer. "I know why you've come," she said before Greta was off the wagon. "Whole valley's talking about the German woman who called Victor Hale a liar to his face on the bank porch. Half of them think you're brave. Other half think you're about to get the Mercer boy killed." She looked Greta up and down without softening. "Which is it?" "Both likely," Greta said. "Brave people usually are." The old woman almost smiled. "Come up to the house. You'll take coffee and you'll tell me true, and if I catch you shading it to make it prettier, you'll take your leave." She told it true. She told Pruitt about the fire and the note called early, and the survey that didn't exist, and the water Hale meant to dam, and she did not shade one word of how bad it stood. And when she'd finished, the widow Pruitt sat quiet a long moment, turning her cup. "My Thomas dug his half of that creek's ditches with his own hands," Pruitt said finally. "The year we married. Hale wants to sell me back the water my husband dug the ground for." She set the cup down hard enough to ring it. "I've got 6 wagons and 2 strong boys and no man left alive to tell me I can't. You form your line, Miss Hoffman. I'll be at the head of it if you'll have an old woman there, and any man in this valley too yellow to stand next to a widow can explain that to his wife." She stood. "And you tell Caleb Mercer his Sarah would be proud of the company he's keeping. I knew that girl since she was in pigtails. She'd have liked you fierce." Greta rode off the Pruitt place with 6 wagons pledged, and her throat tight because it had been a very long time since anyone had told her she belonged at the head of anything. But not every door opened, and the ones that stayed shut taught Greta the shape of what she was still up against. "I can't," said a farmer named Coyle, not meeting her eyes, his wife white-faced behind him. "Hale holds my note same as Mercer's. I stand up in that line of wagons, I lose everything by frost. I got 4 young ones, ma'am. I can't gamble 4 young ones on a German cook being right about a survey." "I understand you," Greta said, and she did. And she didn't push because she'd learned that fear pushed only digs in harder. "But understand me back. When Hale dams that creek, your 4 young ones drink what he lets down the ditch and not a drop more. The day you can't gamble against him is the day he's already won you. I'm not asking you to stand in the line tomorrow, Mr. Coyle. I'm asking you to remember when your neighbors stand, and you didn't, that the German cook told you the water was coming for your children too, and you shut the door." She turned to go. "Keep the door shut if you must, but keep it shut with your eyes open." She was 3 farms into that day's riding when the thing happened that turned the whole summer over, and it happened because Coyle frightened worse by her leaving than by her asking rode straight to Victor Hale to buy his own safety with what he knew. He told Hale about the wagon line. He told him the day it would form the eastern siding, the buyer all of it. And Victor Hale, who had lost the town and the bluff and nearly lost the witness, sat and listened to a frightened man hand him the one thing he needed. And he did not go for fire this time, and he did not go for the witness. He went for the law. Because a rich man's last and strongest weapon is not the match and not the hired gun. It is the law itself bent just far enough, and Victor Hale had spent 2 years buying the pieces of it he might one day need. The sheriff came for Caleb on the 8th day of the 10. Amos Ward rode into the Mercer yard at noon with 2 deputies and a paper in his hand, and he would not look at Greta or the boy. And when Caleb came out of the ruined barn, wiping his hands, Ward held the paper out at arm's length like it was hot. "Caleb Mercer," he said, and his voice was heavy with the thing he'd decided to do. "I got a warrant for your arrest. Fraud against the bank. Sworn complaint says you took a loan on land you'd already stripped of value knowing it was worthless, with intent to cheat the note holder." He couldn't meet Caleb's eyes. "And there's a court order comes with it. Says the standing crop and the low field are held under bond till the fraud's settled. Nobody harvests, nobody touches the creek till a judge says." "The complaint," Greta said, stepping forward, her voice flat and terrible. "Who swore it? Read us the name." Ward looked at the paper. "Sworn by Roy Deakins. Statement in the bank dated the 9th of June. Says Mercer knew the land was ruined and borrowed against it anyhow." That statement was recanted, under oath, before a real judge. "We have the sworn copy." "I know you say you do." Ward's jaw was tight. "But the complaint in front of me is the June 1 filed proper, and a warrant's a warrant, and I don't get to decide which of a man's two sworn statements is the true one. That's for the court. Till the court says otherwise, I got to take him." He nodded at the deputies. "I'm sorry, Caleb. I truly am, but it's got a judge's stamp, and I've run out of ways to be slow about it." And there was Victor Hale's masterstroke laid bare. He had taken Deakins' recanted lie, the very lie they'd turned into their weapon, and filed the original version as a criminal complaint, before their sworn recantation could be heard, so that the law had to act on the lie first and sort out the truth later. Later, after the frost. After the 10 days after the harvest rotted under bond in a field, no one was allowed to touch. Caleb looked at the deputies. He looked at his son who had come out onto the porch and gone white. He looked at Greta. "Don't fight it," Greta said before he could. She said it fast and hard. "Do not fight it. Caleb, do not give them one thing more to charge you with. Go with the sheriff. Stand up straight, and go and let the whole valley see them take an honest man to jail on a thief's coached lie, because that Mr. Mercer—" Her voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with a fury she was holding down by main strength. "That is the picture that finishes Victor Hale. A rich man who can't beat you fair, so he burns your barn, and when that fails, he buys the law and jails a widower in front of his boy. Let them see it. Let all of them see it. I will have you out. The crop's under bond," Caleb said, his hands going out to the deputy's irons. "The field's sealed. The 10 days run out while I sit in a cell. Greta, by the time I'm cleared, there's no harvest, no note paid, no ranch. He doesn't need to win the case. He just needs the case to take long enough. Then I will make it take short enough." She stepped to him as the irons went on, and she did not weep, and she took his bound hands in her two broad, steady ones, the way she'd offered her hand in the dust on the first day, and she held them. "You held 10 days without breaking. I asked you to, and you did. Now you hold a jail cell the same way. You keep your back straight and you say nothing to any man till I come, because I am coming, Caleb Mercer. I have crossed an ocean for less than this. I did not travel half the world, and dig your fields and turn your thief and break your bluff to lose you to a paper on the 8th day. Her voice dropped so only he could hear. "You are not your father's land, and I am not my father. Nobody is walking off this ground. Do you hear me? Nobody walks off." The deputies pulled him up onto a horse. Ethan came off the porch running, and Greta caught him and held him back with one arm, and the boy screamed for his father, and Caleb turned in the saddle and called out the last thing over his shoulder as they led him away. "Ethan, you mind Miss Greta? Whatever she says, you do it. She's—" His voice broke and came back. "She's family now, you hear me? She's family? You mind her like your own." And then he was gone up the road between the two deputies, with the sheriff behind an honest man taken in irons off his own ruined ground. And Greta Hoffman stood in the yard with a screaming boy in one arm and a burned barn at her back, and a crop sealed under bond in a field she wasn't allowed to enter, and 8 days of an army she hadn't finished raising, and she did not fall, and she did not weep, and she looked up the empty road where they'd taken him, and spoke very quietly to no one, and to herself, and to the men in good coats on 2 continents who had never once heard her answer them until now. "You've taken the man," she said. "You have not taken the woman, and you have never in your life had to beat both. She had exactly 1 hour of standing still in her, and she spent it that first night after they took him sitting at the table with Ethan asleep against her side, and Deacons across from her with his burned shoulder bound, and she used the hour not to grieve, but to count, because counting was the only prayer she had ever fully trusted. 8 days, she said. The note comes due on the 8th day. Caleb sits in a cell on a charge sworn from a lie we already broke. The crop and the low field are sealed under a judge's bond, so we can't harvest a stalk or dig a ditch. And Hale sits on all of it, and waits for the calendar to do his killing for him. She turned the tin box on the table. So, we do not wait for the calendar. We beat it. Roy, can you ride? I can ride. Then at first light you ride to Vance and Pruitt and every farm that opened its door, and you tell them the wagons form in 3 days. Not the day I said before, because Coyle carried the old day to Hale, and Hale will have men at the eastern siding waiting to turn us. We change the day, and we change nothing else, and we tell no one who isn't already sworn to us. She stood. I'll ride to the county seat. There's a real judge there who took your recantation. If I can get him to hear the fraud complaint set beside your sworn truth, he can throw the charge out and Caleb walks. But a judge moves slow, and I have 8 days, so I will make him move fast. How do you make a judge move fast? Deacon said. You put the whole valley in his courtroom, Greta said, and let him decide in front of them whether he's a judge or Victor Hale's clerk. A man will do the right thing in front of 200 people that he'd never do alone in his chambers. That is the only honest use I have ever found for a crowd. She reached the county seat by the second afternoon, and there she hit the first wall, and it was a smooth wall with a soft voice. The judge's name was Latham, and he was not a bought man, but he was a careful one, and careful men have their own way of being useless. I have your sworn recantation from Mr. Deacons, Latham said, turning it over. And I have a criminal complaint against Mr. Mercer sworn on Mr. Deacons's earlier statement. What you're asking me to do is decide today which of a man's 2 contradictory oaths is the true one, and dismiss a felony on my own say-so. I can't do that from a chair. That's what a trial's for. A trial that will not be called until after the frost, after the note comes due, after the ranch you'd be ruling on has already been taken. Greta stood across from his desk. You know that. Hale knows that. The whole design of it is that the truth arrives too late to matter. You would be dismissing a case about a dead ranch. That may be. But the law's the law, and it doesn't move faster because a woman's in a hurry. Then let me give you something the law can move on today. She laid a second paper before him. This is a petition signed this morning by 41 farmers of this valley, asking the court to expedite the Mercer matter on grounds that a man's liberty and a family's land are being run out by a calendar rather than a verdict. 41 Judge Latham. And they are riding here, all of them. They mean to sit in your courtroom the day you rule, so that whatever you decided in front of the people you'll answer to at the next election. She let that sit. I am not asking you to be brave. I am asking you to set a hearing for the 7th day, and to know that the room will be full. Latham looked at the petition a long time. 7th day, he said finally. 10 in the morning. I'll hear the recantation and the complaint together. He set his pen down. But understand me, Miss Hoffman. I set the hearing. I don't promise the ruling. You'd best bring me more than a thief who changed his mind, or I'll have no honest choice but to let it go to trial and your calendar wins. I'll bring you more, Greta said, though she did not yet have it, because she had learned long ago that you promise the thing and then you go and find it and never the other way around. She went to see Caleb before she left the county seat, and that was the hour that nearly broke her, and she let it break her a little, because there was no one there to see. He was thinner already. 3 days in a cell, and the man had gone gray around the eyes. He came to the bars when the jailer led her back, and he gripped them, and for a moment neither of them said a thing. The boy, Caleb said first. Always the boy first. Is he? He's safe. He's at the house with Deacons, and he asks for you at every meal. And I tell him you're coming home, and I mean to make it true, so I'm not a liar to your son. She stepped close to the bars. You look like a man who's been talked to. Who came? Caleb's jaw tightened. Hale, yesterday. Walked in like he owned the jail, and near enough he does. He looked away. Made me an offer. Said he'd have the charges dropped today, gone like they never were the minute I signed the sale. Said I could walk out of here a free man with my boy in an hour if I just gave him the field. His hands went white on the bars. And Greta, God help me. I sat in that cell after he left and I thought about it. Not for the land. For Ethan. A free man can raise his son. A man rotting on a fraud charge can't. I thought about signing. Did you sign? No. He said it quiet. I didn't. And you want to know what stopped me? Wasn't pride. Wasn't the land. He looked at her through the bars. It was you. It was thinking about you standing in that yard telling me nobody walks off this ground. I couldn't be the man who signed while you were out there fighting for it. I'd sooner rot. His voice cracked. He told me I was a fool. Said you'd be gone by winter that hired help. Always is that I was gambling my boy on a woman who'd take her wages and move on the first cold morning. And I looked at him and said the only thing I've been sure of in 2 years. I said, Mister, you don't know her, or you'd know she doesn't leave. She's the one thing you can't buy and can't scare, and it's going to be the end of you. He swallowed hard. But I'm scared, Greta. I'm scared I'm going to sit in here brave and lose everything anyway, and Ethan's going to grow up knowing his pa was too stubborn to save him easy. And there was the thing Greta had been waiting 3 weeks and 1 jailhouse for the man to finally say out loud, the fear under all the other fears, and she reached through the bars and took his hand, and she did not let go. Listen to me, Caleb Mercer, because I am only going to say this the once. Her voice was low and fierce. You have spent 2 years believing you had to hold everything alone. The ranch, the boy, the grief, all of it on your 2 shoulders, because you decided somewhere back that a man who lets anyone carry a piece of his load is a man who'll be left holding nothing when they leave. Sarah left. Deacons betrayed you. The town closed its books, and every one of them taught you the same lesson, hold it alone or lose it. She gripped harder. But you have had it backward the whole time. You never had to hold it alone. You only never trusted anyone to stay long enough to hand them the weight. Well, I stayed. I dug your fields, and I turned your thief, and I broke the man's bluff in front of his own town, and I am not going anywhere, and I am telling you, give me the weight. You hold this cell. I will hold everything else. That is not you failing your son. That is you finally letting your son see a father strong enough to lean. Caleb Mercer put his forehead against the bars and wept, and Greta held his hand through the iron and let him, and when he had finished, he lifted his head, and there was something in his face that had not been there in 2 years. When I get out of here, he said, there's a thing I mean to say to you. Not now, not through bars, but there's a thing, and you'll want to be standing somewhere better than a jail when I say it. Then get out of here, Greta said, so I can hear it. And she left before her own face could betray her, because a woman running an army cannot be seen with her heart on the outside of her. She found the seam on the 5th day, and she found it the way she'd told Caleb she would in a man Hale had used up and thrown down. Toby Fenn was the young rider's name, and Greta had remembered his face from the muzzle flash the night they came for Deacons, and she found him in a whiskey tent at the edge of the county seat, drinking alone the way a man drinks who has done a thing he can't wash off. She sat down across from him without being asked which was her particular gift, and she set a coin on the table between them. You know who I am, she said. Fenn's eyes went wide and then went to the tent flap. Sit, Greta said. If I meant you harm, I'd not have brought a coin. I brought a coin because I mean to buy something, and a man like you sells cheaper the more Hale uses him, and Hale has used you hard. She let the coin lie. He sent you to hand a man an envelope, and then he sent you the same night to cut that man's witness dead in a cellar. A man doesn't send his good help to do murder. He sends the help he's already decided is too dirty to keep. You know that. You've known it a while. It's why you're drinking alone. Fenn's hand shook around his glass. You don't know what he'd do to me. I know exactly what he'd do to you because he's already doing it. He's used you to a nub, and the day this is over, he drops you, and if it goes bad, he hands you to the law as the man who did the burning and the killing while he stands clean in his good coat. She leaned in. I'm not the law, Toby Fenn. I'm the woman who can keep you out of the law's hands if you help me put Hale in them first. Now. The note transfer, May the 4th. And an amendment filed May the 9th that let Hale set his own appraisal. 5 days apart. You carried papers between Hale and that recorder all spring. Tell me about the 9th of May. Fenn stared at her, and something moved behind his eyes, and Greta held her breath and did not let him see her hold it. If I say it, I'm a dead man, Fenn said. You don't know him. He's got men in 3 towns. He'd find me in a week. He'd find you in a day, Greta said. You're not hard to find, Toby. You're sitting in a whiskey tent where he sent you to drink yourself quiet. The difference is, which of us finds you first and what you're worth when we do. A man Hale wants dead is worth a bullet. A man the court wants talking is worth a guard on his door and a clean name after. I can make you the second man, but only if you decide it in the next minute, because after tonight the ground moves, and I can't promise you the same offer twice. Fenn's hands shook so hard the whiskey jumped in the glass. Then slow, like a man setting down a thing he'd carried too far, he pushed the glass away. I carried it. Fenn said so low she had to lean. The amendment. I carried it to Pettibone myself. He swallowed. But it wasn't signed when Hale gave it to me. The bank president's line was blank. Hale filled it in himself at his desk with a paper. He had an old letter from the bank president so he could copy the hand. I watched him do it. He practiced the signature on scrap till it matched. Then he signed the amendment with it and sealed it and handed it to me to file. Fenn's voice broke. The bank president never signed that amendment. Hale forged him. I filed a forged paper with the county, and I've known it since May, and I didn't know how to, and there it was. There was the seam Greta had told Caleb about in the lamplight, on the first night, the seam that every fast-built thing has, and Victor Hale's whole 2-year machine ran on one forged signature, filed on the 9th of May, and Greta had just found the man who filed it. You will swear that, she said. Not a question. He'll kill me. He will try. He tried already the night you came for Deacons, though you didn't know it then. A man who sends you to do murder has already decided he can spend you. The only way you live, Toby Fenn, is if you are worth more to the law alive and talking than dead and quiet. So you swear it before Judge Latham in a full courtroom, and the moment you do, you are the state's witness, and Hale can't touch you without hanging himself. She stood and picked up the coin and set down 3 more. That's for a bed and a shave and a clean shirt. A judge believes a clean-shaven man. Be at the courthouse on the 7th day at 10, and if you run, I will not chase you. But Hale will, and he runs faster than me. She paused at the flap. You carried the letters, Toby. You saw everything. You could have been the man who broke him 100 times over. Be that man once. She rode home through the 6th night with a forgery in her memory, and a witness half-turned, and a hearing set for the morning after next, and she should have felt the thing tightening toward victory, and instead she felt the air go wrong, the way it goes wrong before the kind of summer storm that flattens a county, and she put the heels to her horse because she'd raised a family through weather like this, and she knew what a night like the one coming could do to a granary full of the only harvest standing between Caleb Mercer and ruin. She reached the ranch 2 hours ahead of it, and she had those 2 hours, and she spent them the way she spent everything fast. Roy. She was off the horse before it stopped. Get Ethan up. There's a storm coming from the southwest with a green sky behind it, and it means to drown the low field and the granary both. Where are we with the wagons? Deacons came out pulling his suspenders up. Vance is set. Pruitt's set. Wagons form day after tomorrow dawn like you said. But Greta, he looked at the sky, that low field sealed. Court bond. We touch it, we dig one ditch to turn that water, and Hale's got us for violating the order. He'll say we broke the seal jail, you same as Caleb. I know what the order says. Greta was already moving. And I know what the water does. If that field floods, we lose the crop in it, and we lose the creek head that proves the whole water scheme, all of it washed out in a night, and Hale gets to stand up in court and say there's no evidence and no harvest and no case. He would like nothing better than for this storm to do his work while I sit on my hands honoring his bond." She stopped and turned. "So here is the thing, Roy Deakins, and I need you to hear it clear, because I won't order a man to break the law beside me. The bond says no harvesting and no touching the creek. It does not say I cannot save a child's home from a flood. If a court wants to jail a woman for digging a ditch to keep a 7-year-old's roof over his head, then let that be the picture the valley sees the same week they see an honest man in irons. Let Hale explain that one too." "You mean to dig the field?" "I mean to save the field. There's a difference, and I'll make Latham feel it." She threw a shovel at him, and he caught it one-handed, even with the burned shoulder. "Now ride to Vance and Pruitt and tell them the wagons wait, but the neighbors don't. Tell them Mercer Creek floods tonight, and the German woman is standing in it alone with a boy, and I want to know which of them meant the word when they shook my hand, and which of them only liked the sound of it. Go." He went, and the storm came, and it came the way those storms come, all at once, and from everywhere, and Greta Hoffman stood at the head of the low field, with a shovel and a lantern, and a 7-year-old she could not make stay in the house, and she began to dig the ditch that would either save the ranch or send her to the cell beside its owner. "You dig where I dig," she told Ethan over the first hard gust. "You do not go near the creek bank, you hear me? The water's already coming up, and it'll take you off your feet, and I'll not be able to reach you. You stay high, and you dig, and you keep the lantern lit. That's your whole job, and it's the most important one." "Is Pa gonna know I helped?" "Your Pa is going to know you dug a flood back from his ranch at 7 years old, and he's going to tell that story until you're a grown man sick of hearing it." She drove the shovel. "Now dig." They dug alone for the first quarter hour, and it was not enough one woman and a boy against a creek coming up over its banks, and Greta felt the water find her boots and climb her ankles, and knew the plain arithmetic of it, that 2 people could not turn this water. That the field was going under, that she had gambled, and the weather had called it. And then, out of the dark, came a sound she'd have known anywhere, the sound of wagon wheels and men shouting, and a widow's voice cutting over all of it like a blade. Mercer Creek. Pruitt, standing up in her wagon with a lantern held high. "Where do you want us, German? We didn't ride through the devil's own bathwater to stand about." They came off their wagons into the rising water. Vance and his 3 Pruitt, and her 2 boys the Hollisters, a dozen more. The whole open-door half of the valley, wading into a sealed field in the middle of the night to turn a flood off a jailed man's ranch. And Greta stood knee-deep in the water and shouted them into a line, and felt something crack open in her chest that had been shut a very long time, because she had crossed an ocean alone, and buried a husband alone, and fought a rich man near enough alone, and she had forgotten somewhere in all that alone that a person could stand in a flood and not be the only one in it. "The ditch first," she roared over the wind. 20 of you on the ditch, we deepen it, and we throw the spoil to the high side. We make it a wall and a channel, both. It turns the water south away from the granary, but only if it holds, and it won't hold. If we dig it shallow, so dig it like your own roof depends on it, because tonight it does. They dug, and for a while it held, and then it didn't. The creek came up faster than the ditch went down, and Greta felt the water find the low lip of it and start to slop over toward the granary, and a farmer named Hollister shouted the words nobody wanted. "She's topping. The ditch is topping, the water's coming over the north end. Then we bank the north end higher now, all hands." Greta was already there throwing mud with her bare hands where the water was breaching. "Pruitt, your boys' coats. Anything we plug it. Vance the timber off your wagon, lay it flat on the high side, and pack mud behind it. Move the granaries 40 feet off, and everything Caleb Mercer has left in the world is dry inside it, and I did not stand in this creek all night to watch it float away in the last hour." They plugged the north end with wagon timber and coats, and one door pulled off Pruitt's own tool shed and hauled 2 miles in the storm, and the water snarled against it and held, and just as it held, Vance went down. The mud took his legs, and the current had him, and he was 5 feet toward the creek proper before 2 of his own sons caught him by the collar and hauled him back coughing, and Greta got him upright with a fist in his shirt. "You stay off that bank," she shouted into his face. "Nobody goes near the creek proper. Do you hear me down the line? The ditch, the wall, the granary. but not one boot near the creek bank. That water's fast enough to take a grown man, and it's black as a well. We cannot see to save you if it takes you. High ground and hard work, that's all. That's the whole of it. Sandbags to the granary wall. She roared then because the ditch was turning the water, but the granary needed its own line of defense. The ditch turns most of it, but if the ditch tops again, we lose the crop, so we bank the granary too. Pruitt, your boys on the ditch with me, Vance the wall. Roy, where's the boy? And that was the moment the night turned, because in the shouting and the water and the lanterns, she had lost sight of Ethan for the length of a breath, and a breath was all it took. And when she spun with the lantern, the boy was not on the high ground where she'd set him. He was at the creek bank reaching for the lantern he'd dropped, which had rolled toward the water, because he'd been told to keep it lit. And a good boy does what he's told, even to his own ruin, and the bank gave under him, and Ethan Mercer went into Mercer Creek, in full flood in the black of night, and Greta's scream tore out of her raw enough to cut over the storm. Ethan! She was already moving, and she was not fast enough. No one her size in water that high could be fast enough, and she knew it, even as she lunged, and a shape went past her in the dark, low and hard. Roy Deakins with his burned shoulder throwing himself into the flood after the boy. Without a half-second's thought, the same man who 2 years had stolen the food out of that child's mouth, now going under black water to pull him out of it. For 3 seconds, there was nothing. The whole line stopped. Pruitt had her lantern out over the water, and there was nothing. Just the roar, and Greta stood in the creek up to her waist, with her hand out toward a place where 2 people had been and now were not, and she made a sound that wasn't a word. Then Deakins came up. He came up 10 feet downstream, with the boy clamped against his chest with his good arm, hauling them both toward the bank against a current that wanted them dead, and Greta and Vance were in the water, to their shoulders grabbing for him, and they got a hand on his collar, and then his arm, and then they had them both dragging the man and the child up onto the mud, and Ethan coughed up half the creek and started to cry, which was the best sound Greta had ever heard, because a crying child is a breathing child. I got him, Deakins gasped, flat on his back in the mud, his burned shoulder gone the color of the sky. I got him, Greta. Tell Caleb, he coughed water. Tell Caleb I got his boy. Tell him Roy got the boy. That's the crop I owed him. That's paid now. That one's paid. You'll tell him yourself, you great fool, same as the pony. Greta had the boy against her, feeling his heart go alive. You don't get to die a hero and leave me to run this ditch without you. Get up, we're not done. The water's still coming, and this crop still stands, and you did not just pull that child out of the creek to lose his home to a puddle. Get up. And Roy Deakins, who had never in his life been given a reason to get up that was worth the getting got up. They turned the water before dawn. Barely. The ditch held and the sandbags held, and the granary stood with its foundation wet and its grain dry, and the low field flooded at its edges. But the creek head held the evidence. Held the crop held. And when the storm finally broke apart into a gray drizzle, the whole exhausted line of them stood in the mud and looked at what they'd saved, and nobody cheered because they were too tired to cheer. And Greta walked the line and gripped every hand and said each name, because a person should hear their own name from the one they saved a home for. Vance caught her hand and held it a beat longer than the rest. I sold to that man out of fear, he said, his voice raw. 2 years I've been ashamed to look my boys in the eye over it. Tonight I stood in a flood for a neighbor and got a piece of it back. He gripped harder. Whatever happens in that courtroom tomorrow, German, you gave me that. A man doesn't forget who handed him back his own spine. You dug your spine out of the mud yourself, Ed Vance, Greta said. I only told you where the shovel was. But she held his hand a moment because there is a kind of thanks a proud man gives only once, and a wise woman does not hurry past it. Pruitt came up wringing creek water from her skirts, 60 years old and grinning like a girl. Been a long while since I fought that hard for anything but my own fence line, she said. Forgot how good it feels to lose sleep over somebody else's roof. You've woke this valley up, girl. Whatever it cost you, you woke us up. She looked at the granary standing dry against the gray. Sarah Mercer'd have had you at her table every Sunday. I'll say that to Caleb myself the day he's out. But she was not done. And she knew she was not done because a flood turned is not a man beaten. And Victor Hale had not spent the storm asleep. He'd spent it the way she'd feared he might, and she found it out when Vance's oldest came riding hard along the creek at first light, shouting that there were men upstream at the Narrows, Hale's men with picks and a wagon of timber. And Greta understood the whole of it in one cold breath. "He's not trying to flood us," she said. "He's trying to dam us." Now tonight, while the creek's up and the law's asleep, and every honest man in this valley is standing in my field, too tired to stop him. He means to throw a dam across the Narrows and have it stand by morning, so that whatever the court says about who owns the water, he owns the water in fact, and possession is 9 parts of the fight. She was already pulling herself up onto Vance's horse behind the boy. "Pruitt, your shotgun's still loaded. It's a widow's shotgun, girl. It's always loaded. Then bring it, and bring every man who can still stand, because Victor Hale has finally done the one thing I needed him to do." Greta's voice rang out over the tired, muddy, furious line. "He's come off his porch and out from behind his papers in the dark with hired men and stolen timber to steal a creek that a court has under its own seal. Do you understand what that is? That is not a rich man buying land anymore. That is a thief caught with his hands on it in front of 40 witnesses. Ride." They came on the Narrows at the gray edge of mourning 40 farmers and a widow with a shotgun and a German woman on a borrowed horse, and there was Victor Hale himself, coat and all, standing on the creek bank, directing 4 men who were driving timber into the flooded Narrows to choke the water. Victor Hale caught in the act off his porch, out of his papers, with his own hands on the very theft he'd spent 2 years hiding behind clauses and surveys and other men's signatures. He turned when he heard the horses, and for the first time since Greta had known his name, Victor Hale's face was not smooth. "This is my creek," he said, "but there was a crack in it now. I hold the note on this land. I have every right to. You hold a note built on a signature you forged with your own hand on the 9th of May. Greta said, walking her borrowed horse straight at him through the shallows. "And I have the man who filed it for you sworn to a judge tomorrow at 10. You hold nothing, Victor Hale. You never held anything. You built 2 years of theft on one lie, and I found it, and now you've come out in a storm to steal a creek in front of 40 people because the paper's slipping and you know it. Look at them." She swept her arm at the line of farmers. "These are the people you told there was a railroad. These are the people whose water you meant to sell them. And here you stand in the mud at dawn, with a pick in your man's hand, showing every one of them exactly what you are. You didn't need me to beat you in the end, Mr. Hale. You only needed a storm in your own hands. A patient man would have waited for his clean legal theft. But you were never patient. You just had everyone too afraid to make you wait. You forged the president's name." It was Vance wading forward, and his voice shook with a thing bigger than the cold. "I sold you my daddy's 40 on your word as an honest man. And you've been forging names in the county book the whole time. He forged the railroad, Ed." Pruitt said, her shotgun level and her voice dead calm. "He forged the whole valley. Why not a name or two?" She thumbed the hammers back, and the 2 clicks carried clean across the water. "Get off Mercer's Creek, Victor. You've got till I count 3, and I'm a widow with poor patience and good aim, and there's 40 witnesses here to swear you were drowning a creek you don't own. 1. Hale looked at the 40 faces. He looked at Pruitt's shotgun level and calm. He looked at Greta, and Victor Hale, who had ruined a valley. One frightened man at a time discovered the one thing his money had never had to reckon with, which was 40 people who had stopped being frightened all at the same time. And he did the only thing left to a cornered man with no crowd on his side. He called his men off the timber and up onto their horses, and he pointed one gloved finger at Greta across the water. "You think a hearing beats me," he said. "You think a forger's clerk and a thief who changed his mind beats a man with what I have. You'll learn what money does to a witness before 10 o'clock tomorrow, Cook. You'll learn what it does to a judge." He wheeled his horse. "Enjoy your muddy field. It's the last thing you'll own." He rode off, and this time no one tipped a hat, and Greta watched him go without triumph because she'd heard the true thing under his threat. The thing that told her the fight was not finished. That Hale meant to reach Latham, or Fenn, or both, before the courtroom. That he had one night, and a great deal of money, and everything to lose. She turned her horse back toward the exhausted line of farmers, standing in the dawn light, in the ruin of the storm, and she raised her voice one more time because they'd earned the truth, and she'd never once given them less. "He's not beaten yet," she called. "He's cornered, which is worse, and he has a night and a fortune to spend before that courtroom opens. So I need 6 of you to ride to the county seat with me, now this morning, muddy as we are, and stand watch over one frightened witness in a rooming house until 10 o'clock tomorrow, because Victor Hale is going to try to buy him or bury him tonight, and we are not going to let him do either." She looked down the line. "You saved a crop tonight. Now come save a man. And then tomorrow, God willing, and the creek staying up, we take a widower home to his son." And out of the tired, soaked, filthy line of them, more than 6 hands went up, more than a dozen, more than 20. The whole open door half of a valley that had learned in one storm the thing Greta had crossed an ocean to teach one ranch, that the men in the good coats only ever win the ones who stand alone, and not a soul in that field was standing alone anymore. She rode for the county seat with the sun coming up on the 6th day gone, and the 7th beginning a forgery in her memory, and a witness to guard, and a hearing at 10, and a man in a cell she had promised his son she'd bring home. And behind her rode 20 farmers who had decided somewhere in the black water of that night that they would rather lose everything standing together than keep it kneeling apart. They rode into the county seat still wearing the mud of the flood, and the town saw them come, 20 farmers and a widow and a German woman caked to the knees in creek bottom, riding in at a walk down the main street, like the last of an army that had won something the night before and meant to finish winning it in the morning. And doors opened up and down that street, and Greta did not slow, because a thing seen is a thing that spreads, and she wanted every soul in that county to spread the word by nightfall that the Mercer people had come to town and did not look beaten. She put 6 men on Toby Fenn's rooming house before she did anything else. 2 at the front door, 2 at the back, 2 on the stair, she told Vance. "Nobody in or out that isn't sworn to us. If a man comes with money, you turn him. If a man comes with a gun, you wake the street. Hale has 1 night to reach this witness, and he will spend all of it, so we spend all of it too." She went up to Fenn's room herself, and she found him sitting on the edge of the bed with his shaved face in his hands, shaking a clean shirt on him and no color under it. "I can't," Fenn said before she'd shut the door. "I've been sitting here all night thinking on it, and I can't. You don't know what he'll do. He'll stand up in that court with his lawyer and his money, and he'll make me out a liar and an arsonist and a killer, and every word of it's true." "Miss Hoffman, that's the worst of it. Every word's true. Who believes a man like me over a man like him?" "Nobody," Greta said, and sat down beside him, which was not the answer he'd braced for. "You're right. Nobody in that courtroom believes Toby Fenn over Victor Hale. Not one soul. So we're not going to ask them to." Fenn lifted his head. "Then what am I doing there? You're not there to be believed. You're there to be true." She turned to face him. "A man's word can be broken by a better-dressed man's word. That's the whole game, and Hale's won it 100 times. But a man's word set beside a paper that says the same thing the man says, that a rich man's word cannot argue with, because paper doesn't flinch when a lawyer shouts at it. That is a different thing altogether. You are not the proof, Toby. You're the finger that points at it. I have the proof. All you have to do is point, and then you can shake and stammer and cry, and it won't matter because the paper won't shake with you." She stood. "Now sleep 2 hours. I'll wake you. And in the morning, you point 1 time at the truth, and then you never have to be the man Hale made you again." Fenn looked at her a long time. "You keep talking about a paper," he said. "What paper? The amendment's a forgery. That's the whole thing. There's no sleep," Greta said. "And let me carry the paper. It's what I'm for." And she went back down to the street to spend the rest of the night the way she'd spent the whole summer awake, and counting, because she did have a paper, or the promise of one, and she had 2 hours before the telegraph office opened to know whether the promise would keep. Hale's men came at 3 in the morning, the way she'd known they would, and they came with money first because money is quieter than guns. Vance turned them at the door. Greta heard it from the porch below, a soft voice offering a soft fortune, and Ed Vance, who had sold his own father's 40 acres to that same soft voice 2 years back, saying the sweetest words Greta had heard all summer. "I already sold you everything I had to sell, mister. Turned out it cost me my sleep for 2 years. I'm not buying any of it back by selling you a scared boy in a rooming house. Get off the step." They came back an hour later with less money and more men, and that was when Pruitt's shotgun came off her lap and lay across her knees where the moonlight caught it, and the widow said into the dark, in a voice with no fear left anywhere in it, "There's 40 of us up from the valley, and one of me with 2 barrels, and I've buried a husband, and I don't sleep well, and I've been hoping all night somebody'd give me a reason." "You want to be my reason?" And the men decided on balance that they did not. By the time the telegraph office opened at 7, Toby Fenn had slept and Greta had not, and the clerk behind the counter looked up at the big muddy woman who'd been waiting on his step since before light and said the words that won the whole war. "You Hoffman, reply come back overnight from the Cattleman's Hotel in Kansas City, and from the depot telegraph there." He slid 2 flimsies across. "You want 'em witnessed and stamped, it's 2 bits extra." "Stamp them," Greta said. "Stamp them twice. I want no man alive able to say these came from anywhere but where they came from." She read them standing at the counter, and her tired face did a thing it had not done in weeks, which was go still, and then slowly warm, and she folded the 2 flimsies into the tin box beside the forgery, and the confession, and the recantation, and she said to no one quiet, "There you are." Because Elias Harmon, the president of the bank that had held the Mercer note, the one respectable man whose signature stood on the amendment of the 9th of May, had not been in this county on the 9th of May at all. He had been in Kansas City the whole of that week, registered at the Cattleman's Hotel under his own name, transacting bank business at the depot by wire, both of it stamped and dated, and now sworn to by the hotel and the telegraph office. 2 counties east, a man cannot sign a paper in a recorder's office in one town, while he is demonstrably sleeping in a hotel in another, and Greta had the dates, and the dates did not flinch. The courtroom filled by 9:30, and it filled the way she'd promised Latham it would, every farmer from the flood mud still on their boots, and behind them the town dell, the storekeeper standing at the back with his hat in his hands, and Coyle, who'd betrayed them, standing further back, still unable to stay away, and unable to come forward, and Amos Ward with his star, and his 11 tired years, and at the front at the defense table, a nervous young country lawyer named Bell, whom Greta had been up half the night briefing with Caleb Mercer, beside him in irons gray and thin, and sitting up straight as a fence rail, because a woman had told him to hold the cell the way he'd held the 10 days. And across the aisle, Victor Hale, in a coat finer than the judge's bench, with a city lawyer beside him named Crandall, who smiled the way a knife smiles. Ethan sat in the front row against Greta's side, and when they'd brought his father in, the boy had started up, and Greta had put a hand on his knee and said, "Not yet, soon. You hold like your pa's holding." And the boy had held. Latham gavelled it open, and Crandall was on his feet before the echo died. "Your Honor, this is a criminal fraud matter plain and filed. Caleb Mercer borrowed against land he'd stripped of value and defaulted, and the only reason we're in this circus of a full courtroom is that a hired German cook has whipped up a mob of debtors who'd all like their notes to vanish. I move we clear the gallery and try this as the simple fraud it is." "Denied," Latham said. "The gallery stays. A public court is a public court. Mr. Crandall, and I've never yet been harmed by having my county watch me work. Call your first Mr. Bell." And so it began, and it went badly. The way Greta had warned Bell, it would go badly at the start, because you do not lead with your strength. You lead with the thing the other side thinks is your weakness, and let them spend their poison on it. Bell called Roy Deakins. Deakins swore his recantation plain and shaking, that he'd stolen the Mercer store for 2 years on Hale's pay, that Hale had paid him again, to swear the false complaint against Caleb, that it was all a lie, built to ruin an honest man. And then Crandall stood up, and Crandall took him apart, the way a clever man takes apart a confessed thief. "You stole from the Mercers for 2 years. I did. God forgive me, I did. While Mrs. Mercer lay dying. Madden. And you swore in the bank that Caleb Mercer was a fraud, under oath. Did you not?" "I did, but it was under oath. And now you swear the opposite, also under oath." Crandall turned to the jury box. "So by your own mouth, Mr. Deakins, you are a man who steals from the dying and swears whatever the last hand that fed him tells him to swear." Tell this court why should a single soul in it believe the second oath any more than the first. And Deakins, who was not a clever man, and had never been looked at Crandall, and then looked past him at Caleb in his irons, and gave the only answer he had, which turned out to be a better one than any clever man could have built. Because the first oath I got paid for, Roy Deakins said, and this one's costing me everything I got left. A man lies for money, mister. He don't generally lie to lose. I got nothing coming from this but a rope or a cell, and I'm swearing it anyhow, and you can make of that what you want. He looked at the gallery. I pulled that man's boy out of a flood 2 nights back. Near drowned doing it. I don't expect that buys back what I took, but a man trying to buy back what he took don't lie to do it. The room went quiet, and Crandall, who had expected a stammering thief and gotten a plain one, sat down a half-second too fast, and Greta in the gallery let out a breath because Deakins had held. Then Bell called Toby Fenn, and it got worse. Fenn swore that he'd carried the amendment to the recorder, that it was blank when Hale gave it to him, that he'd watched Hale forge the bank president's name at his own desk, practicing on scrap until the hand matched. And Crandall rose and did to Fenn what he'd done to Deakins, only crueler, because Fenn had more to answer for. You set the Mercer barn afire. Hale told me to. You rode to that ranch in the dark to murder a man in a cellar. Fenn's voice was nearly gone. Yes, an arsonist, a would-be murderer, a man who'll do anything Victor Hale pays him to do, and now suddenly a man who'll say anything this German woman pays him to say. Crandall spread his hands to the room. Your Honor, we have now heard from a thief and a killer, both reformed at extremely convenient moments, both pointing at my client. This is not evidence. This is a Cook's puppet show. There is not one honest witness, not one honest paper behind any of it. And there it was. The trap Greta had known Hale would spring, the whole case reduced to the word of 2 ruined men against the word of a rich one, and she felt the room begin to tilt. Hale's way. Felt the farmer's faith start to thin. Because Crandall was right about the one thing that mattered in a courtroom, that so far it was only men's mouths, and men's mouths can be bought, and everyone knew it. Mr. Bell, Latham said, have you anything but oaths? Because Mr. Crandall has a point I can't rule around. 2 recanting criminals do not make a forgery. Have you a paper or have you a puppet show? Bell looked at his notes. Bell looked at Greta. Your Honor. Bell said the defense calls Greta Hoffman. Crandall smiled and did not object because he wanted her on that stand. Wanted the mob's cook exposed as exactly that. And that was his mistake, the same mistake Hale had made on the bank porch. The mistake clever men make about a plain woman, they think her plainness is the whole of her. Greta took the stand. She did not shake. She had been rehearsing this her whole life and only lately learned it. Miss Hoffman, Bell said, you've heard Mr. Crandall say there's no honest paper behind any of this. Is that true? No. You have a paper. I have 3. She reached into the tin box on the rail and did not hurry because she had learned that slow hands make a room lean in. But before the papers, one plain fact, and Mr. Crandall may check it against the county's own record right there on the clerk's desk. The amendment that gives Victor Hale the right to appraise this land himself. The paper this whole seizure stands on is dated the 9th of May, and it is signed by Elias Harmon, president of the bank. Yes, that's the document, yes. Then I would like to know, Greta said, and she turned not to the jury, not to Bell, but to the gallery, to the whole muddy-watching county. How Mr. Elias Harmon signed a paper in the recorder's office in this town on the 9th of May, when on the 9th of May, Mr. Elias Harmon was asleep in the Cattleman's Hotel in Kansas City, 200 miles east, registered under his own name, sending bank wires from the Depot Telegraph the same afternoon the paper says he was here signing it. The room made a sound. These are the hotel's sworn record, and the telegraph office's sworn record. Greta went on laying the 2 stamped flimsies flat where Latham could reach them. Witnessed and stamped this morning that Elias Harmon spent the entire week of the 9th of May in Kansas City and could not by any power on God's earth have signed a paper in this town that day. The signature on that amendment is not late and it is not early. It is impossible. A man cannot be in two places, Mr. Crandall, not even a rich man's banker. She folded her hands. Toby Fenn told you Victor Hale forged that signature. You called him a liar. Here is a paper that says the same thing Toby Fenn said, and this paper never set a fire and never took a bribe and cannot be made to stammer. Argue with it. Crandall was on his feet. Your Honor, hotel registers can be stamped and sworn by two separate offices in a city where neither has any interest in a Kansas land dispute. Latham said, reading, and his careful voice had gone very cold. Sit down, Mr. Crandall. He looked up, and he looked at Victor Hale for the first time all morning, as at a man and not a party. There is one way to settle this, and only one. This court will hear from Elias Harmon himself. Sheriff Ward is the bank president in this county. And here came the twist Greta had not fully seen, because she'd built her whole morning to trap the paper, and Victor Hale, cornered, played the one card she'd left him, and it was a better card than she'd feared. He's here, Your Honor, Crandall said, recovering smooth again. Mr. Harmon anticipated this slander against his name, and came to answer it in person. The defense wants Elias Harmon. The prosecution is glad to give him. Call Mr. Harmon. Because Hale had gotten to Harmon first. Of course he had. He'd had the night Greta spent on the telegraph, and he'd spent it on the one witness who could sink the forgery by simply claiming the signature as his own, and a bank president in a good suit swearing, "Yes, that is my hand, I signed it," would weigh more with a jury than any hotel flimsy would let them believe the register was mistaken. The dates confused, the whole thing, muddied back into one man's word against another's. Elias Harmon took the stand. He was a soft, gray, careful man, and he would not look at the gallery, and he would not look at Caleb and Greta watching him climb into the box, saw the things she'd seen on Dell and on Coyle and on Hollis, the grain buyer, and on half the beaten men of that valley, and her whole tired body went sharp and awake. Mr. Harmon, Crandall said warmly, is that your signature on the amendment of the 9th of May? And there was the moment. The whole summer bent around the packed and silent room, the impossible dates lying on the judge's bench, the rich man watching from his table, and a soft gray banker with his own truth caught in his throat. It is, Elias Harmon said. The gallery groaned. Belle's face fell, and Greta Hoffman stood up in the witness area where she had not yet been dismissed, and she did the thing no cook was permitted to do in a courtroom. And Latham, who might have gavelled her down, did not, because he had watched her lay impossible dates on his bench, and he wanted, God help him, to see where she was going. Mr. Harmon, Greta said, and her voice was not sharp now, it was almost gentle, which was worse. How much does Victor Hale hold against your bank? Harmon's head came up. That's not... He holds your bank's own paper, doesn't he? The same way he holds Dell's note and Coyle's note and half this valley's. He bought the debt of the bank itself some quiet season when you were short, and he has held it over your gray head ever since. She stepped toward the box slow. You just swore that signature is yours. But you were in Kansas City that day, Mr. Harmon. This whole room knows it now. 2 sworn offices know it. So you are sitting in that chair, an honest banker who has never in 40 years told a lie that cost anyone their supper, and you are perjuring yourself in front of your entire county, and I want to know why a decent man does that. And I already know why. It is the same why as Dell's and Coyle's and every frightened man Victor Hale ever owned. You are not lying to protect him. You are lying because you are afraid of him. Because he told you sometime this last night what happens to your bank and your family if you tell the truth on that stand today. That is enough, Crandall barked. Your Honor. Let her finish, Latham said quietly. Greta put both hands on the rail of the witness box and looked at the frightened old man over it, and when she spoke again, the whole packed room had to lean to hear, and every soul in it leaned. Mr. Harmon, look behind you, just once. Look at that gallery. And the old banker, helpless, turned his gray head. Every one of those muddy people was afraid of Victor Hale a week ago. Dell was afraid. Coyle was so afraid he sold us out. They stood alone at their counters and their gates, and they were owned every one because a frightened man alone is the easiest thing in the world to own. Her voice dropped. But 2 nights ago, they stood in a flood together for a jailed man they weren't even kin to, and they found out the thing Hale spent 2 years making sure they'd never find out, that he only ever beats the ones who stand alone. There are 200 people in this room who are not afraid of Victor Hale anymore, Mr. Harmon. You are the last frightened man in the county. You do not have to be. You can perjure yourself for a man who is finished and go to your grave, the banker who lied, or you can turn your head back around and tell this court the truth, and stand up out of that chair a free man same as they did. It is the easiest choice you will ever make, and the only hard part is being the last one to make it. Whose signature is on that paper, Mr. Harmon? Say it true. There's nobody left in this room to be afraid of. And Elias Harmon, president of the bank, 60 years old, and owned for 3 of them, looked at 200 people who had stopped being afraid, and he began to weep, and he said it. "It isn't mine," Harmon said. "God forgive me, it isn't mine. I never signed it. I was in Kansas City. Hale showed me the amendment in June, already filed, already stamped, and he told me if I ever breathed a word that the signature wasn't mine, he'd call my bank's note and ruin every depositor in the county and put it about that I'd done it. So I said nothing. And last night he came to my house and told me to swear it was mine today, or he'd take the bank and my house both. He put his face in his hands. It's a forgery. He forged me. That boy told the truth. It's all true. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Caleb. I let him do it to you because I was afraid he'd do it to me." The courtroom erupted, and Latham gavelled it and did not gavel it hard, and Victor Hale stood up at his table. He stood up because a man like Hale, when the floor finally goes, reaches for the only thing that ever worked, and he turned to the room full of the people he'd ruled by fear, and he tried one last time to use it. "Every note I hold in this county is legal, and due." Victor Hale said loud over the noise, "And I will call every last one of them by Monday. You hear me? All of you. Vance Coyle, the bank. All of it due Monday, and I'll take the roof off every family that stood up in this room today. Victor Hale." Judge Latham's voice cut him dead. "You are under arrest. Forgery of a public document, subornation of perjury, and by the sworn account of the man beside you, the arson of the Mercer barn, and the attempted murder of a witness, Sheriff Ward, will be adding to that list all afternoon." He set the gavel down. "And a man in irons calls no notes. Every instrument you hold in this county was secured or enforced through a documented fraud, and this court will be examining each and every one of them at length with your creditors present. I suspect a good many Valley folk are about to find their debts are a great deal lighter than they feared." He looked at Amos Ward. "Sheriff, take him." And Amos Ward, who had worn his star 11 tired years and spent most of them deciding what wasn't worth the trouble, crossed that courtroom in front of the whole county, and put his hand on Victor Hale's fine shoulder, and it was the first thing he'd done all summer that his book would be proud of. "You want to know the trouble it was worth, Hale," Ward said low, snapping the irons on. "It was worth this. Come on." They took Victor Hale out through a gallery that did not tip a single hat, and somewhere in the middle of it, a farmer started to laugh, the loose, amazed laugh of a man who's just watched a thing he'd stopped believing could happen, and it spread. And by the door, it was the whole room, 200 people laughing and weeping at once. And Toby Fenn sat in the witness chair he'd been so afraid of, and cried like a boy, because he'd pointed one time at the truth, and the paper had not shaken with him. Latham dismissed the fraud charge against Caleb Mercer with 2 words, utterly baseless, and ordered the bond on the crop, and the low field lifted that same hour and struck the false amendment from the record, so that the Mercer note fell back to its honest terms, running to first frost at a fair figure held now by a bank whose president would sooner cut off his own gray hand than trouble that family for a nickel out of season. But the note still stood. That was the thing Greta held on to, even as the room came apart in joy, because a lifted bond and a dismissed charge freed the man, but did not pay the debt, and the harvest still had to sell. And she was already turning to Belle to say so, when Caleb Mercer, Out of his irons, crossed the well of the court in 3 strides, and did not go to Bell, and did not go to the judge. He went to his son. He went down on his knees in front of the front row, and took Ethan up against him, and held him, the way a man holds the one thing he was most afraid of losing. And the boy locked his arms around his father's neck and said into his collar, muffled the question he'd been holding since the sheriff took him off the ranch. "Is it over? Is the mean man gone? Pa, is it over?" "It's over, son." Caleb's voice broke on it. "It's over. We held. You hear me? We held, and it's over." And then Caleb Mercer stood up with his boy on his hip, and he turned and he found Greta Hoffman standing in the well of that courtroom in the flood mud she'd worn for 2 days, and the whole packed room went quiet again, because a room knows when the last thing is about to happen, even before it happens. "You said," Greta started, and found her own voice was not steady, which surprised her. "You said there was a thing you meant to say to me, when you got out, somewhere better than a jail." "I did." Caleb set the boy down, and Ethan took a fistful of Greta's muddy skirt and held it and did not let go. "This is better than a jail. It'll do." He took his hat off the way he'd taken it off in the store the day he stepped between her and Dell, and he held it against his chest, and his hands were not steady either. "Greta Hoffman, I sent to Hayes City for a strong back to bring in a harvest, and I paid $2 for the telegram, and I have never in my life gotten so much more than I paid for, or been so wrong about what I asked for." A ripple of soft laughter through the room. "You came up my road a stranger I tried to send off before you'd set your trunk down. And in one summer, you fed my son, and you turned my thief, and you broke a man I thought couldn't be broke, and you taught me," his voice went, "you taught me a thing I'd forgotten, that a man doesn't have to hold everything alone, that the strong thing, the thing my Sarah always knew, and I let grief make me forget, is letting the right person carry it beside you." He stopped. The room waited. Greta did not move. "I'm not asking you to stay on as hired help," Caleb said. "I'll not have you eating $14 a month at the edge of a life you saved. I'm asking," he had to find it, and he found it. "I'm asking you to stay because there's not a corner of that ranch or that boy or this fool of a man that isn't already yours and has been since about the 3rd day. And I'd be a liar and a coward both if I let you ride off at Frost pretending otherwise. I'm asking you to stop being the woman I hired. I'm asking you to be my wife and Ethan's mother if he'll have you. And I'm asking it in front of the whole county, so there's no man in it in a good coat or a bad one who can ever say you don't belong on that ground. Stay, Greta. Not for wages. For good. It's your home. It's been your home a while. I'm only the last one to say it out loud." And Ethan, before Greta could answer, tugged her muddy skirt and looked up at her with his whole 7-year-old heart in his face and asked the question the way children ask the only question that ever really mattered. "Can she stay, Pa? Can Miss Greta stay for good? Please." Greta Hoffman had crossed an ocean and half a country. She had washed other people's floors and buried a husband under a wrong name, and walked off her grandmother's grave behind men in good coats when she was 14 years old. And in 30 years, she had wanted exactly one thing ground that no man could tip his hat and take from her, and she had told Caleb on the first day that she did not expect to find it for herself, only to win it for the boy. She looked down at the boy holding her skirt, and at the man holding his hat, and at the 200 muddy people of a valley that had stood in a flood beside her, and she found that the thing she'd stopped believing she would ever be allowed to have had walked up her own road in July and shaken her hand on the 3rd day and never once let go. "I came here," she said, and her voice carried to the back of the room where Dell stood with his hat in his hands, and Coyle stood ashamed and forgiven, "to work one summer. That is what the telegram offered, and that is what I came for. One summer and wages, and then gone." She reached down and put her broad, steady, mud-caked hand over the boy's small fist, knotted in her skirt. "But a home is not a thing you are given, and it is not a thing you inherit, and it is not a thing any man in a good coat can hand you or take away. A home is the ground you refuse to leave when everything on it breaks. I have been refusing to leave this one since the 3rd day Caleb Mercer and I am done pretending I ever meant to." She looked at Ethan. Yes, she said. I'll stay. Not for the summer, not for the wages. For good. This is my home, and you are my family, and no man living will ever tip his hat and take either one from me again. And she picked the boy up onto her hip, the way she'd have done it the first day if she'd been let. And Caleb Mercer put his arm around the both of them, there in the well of the court, and the whole county rose up and roared. The wagons rolled 4 days later, and it was the sight that finished Victor Hale's ghost, the way the courtroom had finished the man. Greta stood at the head of the valley road at dawn, and counted them in not 6 wagons, not a dozen, but near 40. Every farm that had opened its door, and half the farms that hadn't coils among them, with coil up on the board, unable to meet her eye. And Greta reaching up to grip his hand anyway, because a home built on refusing to leave has no room in it for a grudge that would only make the leaving easier. You came, she said. Couldn't stand at another counter and look at my boots, Coyle said thick. Not after what I did. Figured I'd rather haul wheat than carry that. He swallowed. I'm sorry, Miss Hoffman. I sold you for 4 young ones and you saved 'em anyway. Then drive, Greta said, and squeezed his hand and let him keep the rest of his shame to spend on being a better man with, because that was the only use she'd ever found for shame. They ran the line east to the honest siding 2 counties over 40 wagons of valley wheat, past the reach of a monopoly that had lost its master. And when the tally came back, it was not 31 cents the bushel, and it was not the low price of a scared valley. It was 44 cents and cash. And it was enough, more than enough, for Caleb Mercer to walk into the bank on the last day before the note came due and lay the full balance on Elias Harmon's desk in honest coin and watch the old banker stamp it. Paid with a hand that shook, and hear him say, "Free and clear, Caleb, free and clear, and I'll carry the shame of near being the man who took it from you to my grave, and thank God every day I'm not." And it turned out Latham had meant every word about examining Hale's instruments, because a fraud that ran on one forged signature ran on 100 small cruelties beside it. And one by one through that autumn, the notes Victor Hale had held over the valley came apart. In the light debts, inflated boundaries moved appraisals, rigged, until half the county found itself lighter than it had feared, and a good many families who'd thought themselves a year from ruin found they weren't ruined at all, only robbed and the robbing over. Hollis the grain buyer tore up his consolidated contract the week Hale went to trial and bought Valley Wheat Fare from then on. And he came out to the Mercer place himself to say it to Greta's face, because a decent man ashamed had turned out in the end to be a decent man who only needed one person to show him the door was there. Roy Deakins did not ride off the Mercer land forever, the way Caleb had sworn he would that night by the barn. He stayed and he worked, and he raised the new barn beam by beam with his own hands, and the scar of the fire still on his shoulder, and Ethan called him uncle again by Christmas. And if a man can buy back a thing, he stole by pulling a child out of a flood, and never once asking to be thanked for it, then Roy Deakins bought it back, and the family let him. Because Greta had taught them that a home with no room in it for a redeemed man is not a home worth keeping. Toby Fenn got his clean name and a guard on his door until the trial was done, and then he got something better, which was work. No one held his past against 2 counties east, where the story of the German woman who'd turned him hadn't followed, and the last Greta heard, he'd married and gone straight and named a son Caleb, which is the kind of thing a man does who has been let up out of the mud one time and never means to go back down. Dell the storekeeper reopened the Mercer account the day after the trial, and would not take a cent that first month, and Greta let him not, because the family needed it, but because a man carrying shame that heavy needs somewhere to set it down, and a wise woman lets the ones who wronged her make it right, because that is how a valley heals, and not just a family. They married in the fall before the first frost that had once meant ruin, and now meant only the honest turn of a year, and they married on the low field by the creek. The field Hale had wanted most. The field the whole valley had stood in a flood to save, and Pruitt gave the bride away, because there was no one left living who had a better right, and the widow said, handing Greta over loud enough for the whole valley to hear, "Sarah Mercer would have wanted it this way, and I knew that girl since pigtails, so nobody argue with me." And when it was done and the boy was between them and the ground under all three of their feet was ground that no man in any coat could ever tip his hat and take Greta Hoffman. Greta Mercer now looked out over the valley that had learned in one hard summer the only thing she'd ever crossed an ocean to teach it, and she understood at last that she had not come to Mercer Creek to work a summer at all. She had come home. She had just been the last one to say it out loud. She never did leave that ground. Not that autumn, not through the long good years after, not ever. A home is not inherited, and it is not given, and it cannot be taken by any man alive. It is built board by board and season by season, by the people who refuse to walk off it when everything breaks. Greta Mercer built hers with her own 2 hands on the ground she chose beside the family that chose her back, and she held it to the end of her days, and no man ever took it from her again.